Chapter 696. Song Song's body was black like charcoal. Song Song's feet were white like jade. Ning Ke had bathed her and loved to sleep with her feet in his arms. He was very familiar with her body, her feet, and everything about her. At this time, looking at this perfect black and white body, he felt extremely strange. When he was a child and dug out the baby girl from the pile of corpses in Hebei province, he felt as strange as the people in the official of council's mansion. However, after so many years of raising her, he was not surprised. It was not until he saw this scene and heard the headmaster's words that he finally understood the truth. Sang Sang was black and white, just like the black chess piece she played in the last game of chess in Lang Temple. As time went by, it finally became a white chess piece in the carriage in the wilderness. At this point, Ning Ke had no hope of getting lucky. There was no Yama in this world. Hao Ian was Yama. There was no underworld in this world. When Hao Ian let the end of the world come, the human world was the underworld. Countless rays of light gushed out of Song Song's body. The calm surface of the Sisui River was like a mirror, condensing the light into a beam of light and then reflecting it to the high blue sky. The river also began to shine brightly. Countless rays of light drilled out of the headmaster's body and connected with the light that gushed out of Sang Sang. A part of him was in Song Song's body, so he could not leave. The headmaster looked at the light seeping out of his body and found it very interesting. He even reached out to touch it, like playing a piano. Then he asked, "Is it time?" There was no emotion on Song Song's face, nor was there any emotion in her voice. It was impossible to tell whether she was a man or a woman. There was no fluctuation, but it was not mechanical, just transparent and empty. And the voice that came from her body had countless syllables, so complex that it was impossible to understand. It was more like the sound of nature. The headmaster understood, so he smiled. Ning Ke did not understand, but he knew that the time of separation had come. One was his most beloved teacher. The other was a woman with whom he had depended on for many years and whose lives had long since become one. There was no doubt that this was the most painful moment of choice a person could imagine. Fortunately or unfortunately, he did not have the ability to make a choice at this time, or perhaps he did not need to make a choice. Ning Ke cannot move. He could only sit on the grass by the Sisui River, looking at the two people who were connected by countless threads of light. His eyes became calmer and more indifferent. No one understood what Hao Ian said. It was like the howling of the wind and the rumbling of thunder resounding through the world. So the human world knew what was happening by the Sisui River. Thus, the entire world began to reverberate with this sentence. "Greetings, Headmaster." At the highest point of the Peach Mountain of the West Hill Divine Kingdom, outside the solemn Divine Hall, a crowd was kneeling on the stone ground. The usually arrogant priests in red and deacons of the Divine Hall were like the most devout believers, touching their foreheads to the ground. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace was also kneeling behind the veil in the deepest part of the white Divine Palace. Outside the veil were the great divine priest of revelation and the great divine priest of judgment. "Greetings, Headmaster." Deep in the western wilderness, at the top of the giant peak in the center of the giant sinkhole, the chief preaching monk of the Shinkong Temple did not hold a staff in his hand. Instead, he put his palms together and prayed with great sincerity. In the countless yellow temples looming in the clouds on the giant peak, the chanting and the same sentence kept ringing, quietly waiting for the headmaster to ascend to heaven. "Greetings, Headmaster." Countless Taoist temples, palaces, and countless distinguished bigwigs in the human world knelt on the ground respectfully and kept repeating this sentence. Somewhere in the distant South Sea, the Taoist in indigo silently looked in the direction of the land with an extremely solemn expression on his face. He did not say that sentence because he was very nervous. He saw a big curtain was falling slowly. He had waited for too long for this moment. He could not rest assured until the end. There were still many people who did not respectfully ask the headmaster to show his divinity. Real, ordinary people did not know what had happened, let alone how it would affect their lives in the human world. As usual, they bought vegetables, cooked, drank, chatted, played cards, stole incense, and fought in the fields. I have been managing the affairs of the human world for too many years. I'm a little tired, a little annoyed, and a little disgusted. So I don't want to manage it anymore. You see, in fact, these people in the human world do not want me to manage them either. The headmaster waved away a strand of light that floated in front of him and looked at Ning, Quebec Ning. K could not move. He could only look and cry. So he cried loudly and tears flowed down his face. Then he began to laugh, inexplicably and nervously. The headmaster was a little depressed and said, "When Hao Qian finally found me in the wilderness, it was very happy," and cried and laughed at the same time. "Why are you acting up now?" Ning Ke suddenly found that he could move his hands. He lifted his sleeves to wipe the tears off his face and said, "I am hating." "Hating what? Hating your wife?" The headmaster laughed and said. Ning Ke looked at the headmaster and said, "I hate you for being irresponsible." The headmaster was startled and said, "How am I irresponsible?" Ning Ke said, "If you ascend to heaven like this, what about the Tang Empire? What about the academy?" The headmaster said, "I am not even interested in such a small matter, let alone Hao Qian." Ning Ke said, "Even if Hao Qian is not interested, how about Hao Qian? If you can't even deal with the enemies in the human world, how can you fight against Hao Qian?" The headmaster smiled and said, "Besides, I am not sure to lose." The smile on the headmaster's face gradually disappeared. He looked at Sang Sang, who was floating above the Sisui River, and suddenly said, "I knew it was you in the carriage in the wilderness. And when you found me, I also found you. Have you ever thought about what I've been doing these days?" Sang Sang was expressionless, as if she did not hear the question. The strands of light on her body became more and more dense and gradually became a stream. "I took you to eat the most delicious roast lamb leg in the world and the most exquisite 18 plates in the kingdom of Song. I took you to eat the most delicious instant boiled mutton in the grassland. I took you to eat peony fish and oyster soup. I took you to see the snow-capped peak, boating on the sea, and the mirror lake of tundra. I even let you and Ning Ke get married. I took you to eat all kinds of delicious food in the world, take you to enjoy all kinds of beautiful scenery, let you experience the greatest happiness as a human, and even let you experience deeper feelings." The headmaster looked at Sang Sang and said, "In your eyes, human beings are nonentities. Now you are married to an ant, and you feel the beauty of it. You feel the full beauty of the human world. Then do you want to stay in the human world? All these years, you have tried everything to find me and invite me to fight in heaven. But have you ever thought that I also want to invite you to the human world as a guest?" In the infinite light, Sang Sang could be vaguely seen. Her thin and delicate eyebrows slightly frowned, as if the headmaster's words were indeed a threat to her. The headmaster smiled slightly. However, after a moment, her frowned eyebrows became as flat as a mirror. The light shone again and was closely connected with the headmaster. Then it was reflected on the calm surface of the Sisui River, and then it was refracted into a beam of light and shot into the blue sky. The beam of light fell into the blue sky, and a light door gradually appeared. The door was opening, and behind it was the divine kingdom of light. The moon in your dream should be the moon in the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. It is really beautiful. The headmaster turned and looked at Ning Quebec. Then he picked him up from the grass, shook his arm, and threw him to the north. The headmaster floated up, left the Sisui River, and flew to the light door in the blue sky. Before the words, "Headmaster, please show your divinity," resounded in the human world, the headmaster went back to some places. He returned to the loose state and was silent for a moment in a hill. He returned to the Tang Empire and walked a few steps in the palace. Then he returned to the academy in the south of Chang, and in front of the academy, the meadow was like a carpet and the flowers were like bunches. The scenery was extremely beautiful. He clasped his hands behind his back and walked along the stone path into the academy. Along the way, he met students in the front yard. Although they did not know who he was, they still bowed to him politely, because the academy required students to respect their elders. The headmaster was very satisfied. The headmaster walked into the teaching building in the front yard and said a few words to Huang He. Then he said to the female professor, "If you wear the indigo gown for too long, how can you get married in the future?" Then he left the front yard, walked through the lane, the wetland, and the old library. He glanced at the sword forest not far away. As usual, Yu Yin was writing small, regular script with embroidery by the east window of the old library. Suddenly, a drop of ink fell from the tip of the brush and stained the golden paper. After a moment of silence, she gently put the brush on the inkstone and bowed to the window. The headmaster walked into the back mountain of the academy. Muyi was embroidering in the pavilion by the lake. She was overjoyed to see the headmaster and said, "You are finally back. Did you bring Sang Sang back? The food these days is terrible." Beigong Weiyong came out of the dense forest with a flute in his hand and complained, "You haven't listened to my music for 6 years. As a teacher, you can't be so biased, can you?" The water wheel by the stream was still running, and the sound of iron forging could be heard from the blacksmith's room. Occasionally, people in the dense forest of the back mountain were shouting that they could not back out of the game. Wildflowers were picked and put into their mouths and chewed into fragrant foam. The little white wolf was bitterly pecked by the big white goose. It ran wildly with its tail between its legs, looking for Tang Xiaotang. Eldest brother and second brother walked out of their respective courtyards and silently followed the headmaster to the back mountain. They walked up the steep stone path and came to the cliff. The headmaster stood on the edge of the cliff. Eldest brother and second brother knelt behind him. The headmaster looked at Chang and city in the distance and smiled. By the Sisui River, the headmaster rode the wind with his black gown fluttering in the air. Sang Sang followed him. Countless golden flowers of light overflowed from her body and sprinkled on the human world. The flowing clouds in the sky were shining with extraordinary splendor. "Welcome the headmaster." The voice echoed in the human world. The tall figure of the headmaster gradually disappeared in the light. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 697. In a certain small town in the human world, in a certain bazaar, it was bustling and chaotic, and the air was filled with the smell of rotten vegetables and chicken droppings. A man carrying a pot of wine walked into a butcher's shop. The butcher closed the shop door and brought the man up to the rooftop on the second floor. They sat down at the opposite table and began to eat and drink. The drunkard looked at somewhere in the sky and sneered. He always said that it's useless no matter how high Haotian flies. Now it seems that it doesn't matter how powerful he is. In the end, I will leave the human world and fly towards the sky. The butcher said, "For the sake of those inexplicable thoughts, we have to give up eternal life and go against the heavens that we can never defeat." In the eyes of some people, this might seem very cool, but in reality, it is nothing more than foolishness. Deep in the forest of the West Hill Divine Kingdom, Chin Pippi knelt by the lake in the Jisho Abbey and kept crying at the sky. His shoulders were slumped and his body was trembling. His eyes were red and swollen, like a rabbit blinded by snow. The middle-aged Taoist stood behind him and comforted him with a sigh. "Since the headmaster has ascended to heaven, then your father can come back. At least this is a good thing." Chin Pippi's father was the Abbey Dean of Jisho Abbey. His name was Chun Mao, and he had been wearing a green Taoist robe for countless years. That was why he was called the Green-Clothed Taoist. Many years ago, Kaharan of the Academy was killed by heaven. The headmaster of the Academy climbed the Peach Mountain and entered the West Hill Divine Palace. The Jisho Abbey was forced to attack with all its strength. In this battle, countless powerhouses of Haotian Taoism died or were seriously injured. Even if the Taoist in indigo asked the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple to help him, they still could not withstand the headmaster's rod. After that, he was forced to wander the South Sea, not daring to step foot on land for the rest of his life. The Taoist in indigo wandered among the countless islands in the South Sea, drifting with the fishing boats. He kept cultivating and had a child with a girl who was fishing for pearls in the South Sea. Then, he sent the child to the headmaster. Even so, he still couldn't set foot on land, because the headmaster did not allow him to go ashore. Today, the headmaster of the academy had finally ascended to heaven. Logically speaking, he could finally reach the shore. However, his green robes fluttered in the wind as he traveled back and forth between the countless islands in the South Sea. His figure suddenly appeared on a lush island. In the next moment, he disappeared. Thousands of miles away, his feet landed on the beach of another island. Then he disappeared again. On every island, he could only stop for a moment, and if he couldn't stop, he would have to flee for his life again. His green Taoist robe was stained with blood, and his Taoist hairstyle had long been disheveled. He was in a sorry state. That was because there was a short wooden stick that was chasing after him. Every time he teleported to an island, the wooden stick would immediately appear. His right shoulder had already been struck once by the stick. If he wasn't very familiar with the countless islands in the South Sea, perhaps he wouldn't have been able to avoid this wooden stick. He was the strongest person in the Tao sect and had entered the legendary limitless state. However, the headmaster's wooden stick was also in the limitless state. He could only continue to flee until the headmaster truly left the human world. Only then would the stick fall into the sea. There was a mountain behind the Jisho Abbey. The rocks and soil were all red, like old blood. However, there were countless green vines growing on the surface of the cliff, so it looked like a green mountain. The dense green vines covered the sky, as well as the caves in the green mountains that were like ant nests. Most importantly, they covered the auras of the experts in the caves. Dozens of hoarse or sharp laughter came from the caves, penetrated the green vines, and went to the human world. These laughter were full of sadness and anger, and seemed so vicious and violent. There were many powerhouses in the Green Mountain caves, most of whom were at the peak of the knowing destiny state. Some of them had even surpassed the 5 states and become legendary. They were all seriously injured. Half of them were injured by Kaharan of the academy, and the other half were injured when the headmaster climbed the peach mountain and cut the flowers. The word academy was the nightmare of these hidden powerhouses of Haotian Taoism. Kuharan was punished by heaven many years ago, and today the headmaster finally ascended to heaven. There was no longer any power in the human world that could make them feel fear. They finally welcomed the time when they could see the light of day again. That was why they cried bitterly. That was why they laughed. That was why they danced with joy. Even though they were basically missing a hand or a leg, they wantonly released their aura, declaring their strength to the world. They were too presumptuous. The powerful aura not only spread to the human world, but even touched the sky. They were not worried that Haotian would punish them, because they were the most devout believers of Haotian and the most loyal subordinates. Haotian would not let them return to the divine kingdom of Haotian at this time. But they forgot that there was someone in the sky. Although the tall figure gradually disappeared in the infinite light, it had not completely left the human world. I didn't want to care about the affairs of the human world, but since you were willing to show up, then let it end well. The headmaster's voice sounded. A foot fell from the sky and stepped on the green mountain. The laughter in the green mountain suddenly turned into horrified screams and shouts of fear. Dozens of extremely powerful auras gushed out and fled to the outside of the green mountain. But it was too late. The foot landed on the green mountain. The green mountain was flat. The hidden powerhouses of Haotian Taoism were all destroyed. Above the sky, in the light, the headmaster shook his foot to shake off the soil and rock chips under his shoes. He glanced at the human world, and then looked at Sang Sang and asked, "You want to go back?" "You can't." There was no emotion on Song Song's perfect face, but now she suddenly showed great fear. The light shone brightly and then dispersed. The gate of Haotian's divine kingdom collapsed. The sky began to shake, and there were even tiny cracks in some places. The tiny cracks in the sky were actually extremely wide for the human world. Countless white stones, neither gold nor jade, fell from the sky and whistled down. They rubbed against the air and turned into tens of thousands of meteorites, which fell on the vast ocean. Countless huge waves appeared on the ocean. Countless hot water mists were generated. There were countless dead fish and birds in the water mists. The human world was safe. Among the tens of thousands of meteorites, there There was a stone that was almost transparent like a crystal. When the fire fell into the sea, the crystal reflected the light from the sky and drew a bright arc in the sky. It flew toward the north of the human world and finally landed somewhere unknown. At the back of the mountain of the academy, the old yellow bull was lying on the meadow listlessly. The eldest brother put a basket of the freshest grass in front of it. The second brother put a plate of the most delicious fish in front of it. The old yellow bull refused to eat grass or fish. It looked very lonely and tired. It slowly closed its eyes, and a drop of water fell from the corner of its eyes. Another drop of water fell on its cheek. Then more and more drops of water fell. The eldest brother and the second brother looked up at the sky and found that it was raining. After the headmaster ascended to the sky, the whole world began to rain. The rain was very heavy and lasted for a very long time. Most of the time, it was a torrential downpour. Occasionally, it would drizzle for a few hours, but it never stopped. This rain was destined to be recorded in history. This rain was destined to change many things in the human world. The headmaster once said that if you kept going north from any place in the world, you would eventually reach a snow-capped peak. That snow-capped peak was the coldest and northernmost place in the world. It never rained in the cold region of the far north. It only snowed. When the night lengthened and the desolate man's tribe moved south, it rarely snowed in this uninhabited and quiet place. But it even began to rain in this place. The snow layer on the surface of the hot sea was riddled with holes by the heavy rain. On the highest snow-capped peak in the world, there were several landslides and avalanches because of the heavy rain. One of the biggest gashes looked as if it had been hit by a flying rock from outer space. Ning-Ke woke up. He found himself in the wilderness. The rain had stopped. He could only judge from the water drops on the grass and the muddy ground that there had been a heavy rain. He did not know how many days had passed, but it must have been a long time. He had not eaten or drunk for many days. Although his body was strong, he still felt weak. His stomach was already empty after being stuffed by the headmaster, but he did not want to eat anything. He sat in the grass after the rain, in the muddy field, hugging his knees and shivering. He looked at the sky after the rain, and his thin cheeks were very pale under the sunlight. The sky was still the same. Nothing changed. The headmaster should have lost the battle with Hao Ian, right? The headmaster was dead. Sang Sang was Hao Ian. If he went back, he would die. He was in pain. What made him the most painful was something else. It was not until now that he understood what the headmaster had said to him before he went to heaven. He could have changed everything, but for many reasons, he did not think of it, or did not want to think of it, so he did not do anything. He watched Hao Ian find the headmaster. He watched the headmaster go to heaven and fight, and then he lost. Ning-Ke hugged his knees and looked at the sky. He just sat like this. He did not want to say anything, do anything, or think anything. He did not know what he should do. Just like this, he sat from the day to the sunset, and sat until the night came. Ning-Ke looked at the darkening night sky and suddenly froze. He rose to his feet, tottering. He laughed loudly, and the laughter became louder and louder. Because his voice was very hoarse, it sounded like he was crying. He lay down on the wet grass, laughing and crying and kicking his legs like a child. A bright moon appeared in the night sky. Of course, it was not the real moon, or the moon that Ning-Ke was familiar with. He had good eyesight. He did not see the crater, only the warm light. A few wolf howls came from the depths of the wilderness. They had never seen the moon, so they did not know what it was. Ning-Ke knew what the bright moon was. The headmaster was still alive, still fighting in the sky, but in a different way. The headmaster had said that it must be beautiful. The scene was really beautiful. He shouted to the bright moon in the night sky, "You must win." It was written on the Ming hand scroll, the sun and the moon cycle, light and darkness blend, endless, the law of nature. The law of nature is the Tao. Tao develops the law. When the law enters the end, the night comes and the moon appears. After Buddha read the Ming hand scroll, he wrote in his notes, "The sun and the moon cycle, the light blends, and the moon should be in the night." However, countless tribulations come, and the moon cannot be seen in the eternal night. The headmaster was the moon. If the headmaster was not born, The eternal night would be like the eternal night. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 698. Writing this plot at the legendary doomsday moment was certainly not calculated. It was just a coincidence. But just like how there is no real doomsday, stories are always full of hope. For me, there are usually two situations when I write to swear. One is when it is too difficult and I feel that I have written it badly. The other is when it is too difficult and I feel that I have written it well. After writing for so many years, if you still remember, I often couldn't help but slap the table at the end of a chapter and praise. It is too *king well written. This was indeed too narcissistic. I was criticized and ridiculed, so I said it less and less and have been tolerating it. But I don't want to tolerate it at this time. I am *king well written. All the uneasiness suddenly disappeared after the first chapter came out. I have no reason not to be confident. Some readers say that I like characters who abuse their popularity, but it's not like that. This is a matter of principle, just like the change of office. A long time ago, a friend said, last year, that you will definitely write the headmaster to death. I said that it depends on what kind of death you understand. I am very satisfied with this plot arrangement. In my concept and plot, the old man is certainly not dead. He only continues to fight in the sky, while Ning K stays in the human world to fight. As for the ending of these two battles, I am looking forward to it. I hope I can write it well. Now back to some of the initial questions in this book. Why is there no moon in this world? First of all, this is not our current world. It should not have, or only one moon. Secondly, I purposely do not want there to be a moon in this world because I want to wait for the moon to appear in this chapter. Everything he did was to serve the headmaster of the academy and to elicit that sentence. If the headmaster is not born, the ages will be like a long night. This is the evaluation of the headmaster and also the emotional judgment I put into it. I am very satisfied at this time. There is another sentence in this story, or rather a word, that I have been looking forward to for a long time. I will continue to write it and write it out for everyone to see. I suddenly thought that if this plot appeared at the end of the month, it would be great. But the cycle of the sun and the moon is natural. It should appear at this time, so it will appear at this time. At this time, I must work hard to get the monthly votes. When the double at the end of the month, I will continue to ask for more. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 699. This was the longest and most extensive reign in recorded human history. It lasted from the height of summer all the way to the beginning of autumn. It was beyond everyone's imagination. The rain continued to fall from the sky, landing on the mountains, rivers, plains, and lakes. After being washed by the rain, cliffs began to collapse, official roads were destroyed, rivers burst their banks, and floods flooded. Such a serious natural disaster was enough to make the whole world feel desperate. Fortunately, the West Hill Divine Palace and the royal families of various countries quickly launched disaster relief. Once again, in the face of serious natural disasters, human beings showed terrible vitality and endurance. They were not knocked down, but calmly accepted and fought hard. The heavy rain also fell on the wilderness. The fields were muddy and soft. It became extremely difficult to walk on it. The herdsmen could not graze, so they had to hide in their tents and suffer. Even the horse gang hid in the forest by Shubi Lake and kept sighing at the rain. After the war in the wilderness, the Tang army divided into two groups and retreated. Among them, the Northeast Border Military arrived at Tuyang City in the south before the rain fell. The cavalry of the Northern Military Camp stayed in Helan City for a while, but were forced to stay by the endless rain. Although the Empire spared no manpower and resources and had been investing for hundreds of years, Helan City was far away in the wilderness, and the buildings in the city were limited. Tens of thousands of cavalry of the Northern Military Camp filled all the tents and residences in the city, but a large part of them were still forced to settle in the city tower. The city tower was high between the cliffs, and the cold wind passed through it at night. The temperature at the turn of summer and autumn should have been suitable for camping, but it had been raining for many days. Autumn came early to the wilderness, and the temperature suddenly dropped. Heelan General Han Qing had spent these days trying to keep the cavalry of the northern military camp warm. The most troublesome problem was the supply of food. Heelan City had a lot of food reserves, but with the addition of tens of thousands of Tang soldiers and countless horses, the pressure on them suddenly increased. They could barely hold on for a while, but if the rain continued, the food from the south could not be delivered, and they could not leave. Then Heelan City would face the danger of food shortage. All kinds of problems and troubles came together to form all kinds of danger. However, no matter if it was the cavalry commander of the northern camp or General Han Qing, they did not dare to use this problem to ask the emperor who they should ask the most. They did not dare to disturb the empress or Grandmaster Huangyang, because his majesty was sick, very sick. The great Tang emperor, Li Zhongyi, was a man who valued friendship and righteousness, but this did not mean that he was inflexible and ignorant of worldly affairs. When he was a prince, he was the most powerful general in the world. In the past 20 years after he ascended the throne, he appeared to be very calm and low-key, but no one dared to look down on him. To the emperors of the South Jin Kingdom, the Yuelan Kingdom, Yin, Qi, Song, and Chun kingdoms, the Tang emperor was definitely at the top of their death list. At all times, there were countless people secretly praying that he would suffer from an incurable disease, cursing him to die from it. In reality, not many people knew that many years ago, Li Zhongyi had contracted an illness. Moreover, this illness was very serious and had always accompanied him. It was ingrained into his internal organs and bones, and there was no way to cure it. The headmaster of the academy had seen the emperor's illness. Perhaps the illness was too troublesome, or the headmaster of the academy had seen the abyss of fate after the illness. So he only wrote a prescription and did not use any human power. The illness dragged on until the autumn of the 18th year of the Tianqi era. With the arrival of the giant golden dragon, with the continuous cold rain, and with a fated stray arrow, the illness broke out. The emperor leaned against the couch, his face pale. He held a handkerchief in his hand, which was stained with blood. The empress lowered her head and did not speak. She gently rubbed his chest, trying to make him feel better. Many people have died in Chang and over the past few years. Many old people who had accompanied my father and even my grandfather have died before me. Now, even the headmaster has left us. Now, I can't do it either. The emperor held her hand and said, "Heaven wants the Tang Empire to die, and it is not because of war. Even so, I have no fear because I believe that the Tang Empire will win in the end." Hot tears fell from the empress' eyes. At this time, the emperor was holding her hand, so the tears fell onto the tightly clasped hands and became splashes. I am the most powerful man in the world. I married the woman I love the most, and in the end, I died on the road to conquer the world. I have no regrets in this life, so don't be sad. The emperor said. The empress raised her head and said with tears on her face, "But I have a lot of regrets. I haven't seen what you look like when you grow old. I haven't let you see little Six grow up. I regret even more that I went south to Chang and under the orders of the sect, seduced and lied to you, and finally hurt you like this." The emperor smiled and said, "Seduced and lied to me, and finally, you still fell in love with me." Listening to the sweet and sour words, the empress finally smiled with tears in her eyes and asked, "Have you ever blamed me? It would be a lie to say that I have never blamed you. After all, who doesn't want to live longer?" The emperor reached out and wiped away the tears on her cheeks. He said, "But later on, I thought that the war between you and me would end with my victory. Then my injuries would be a mark of glory." The empress gently hugged him and murmured, "From the moment I saw you, I lost." The emperor smiled contentedly. He had fought in countless battles in his life, but only this one was the most unforgettable and the most important to him. If I wasn't the emperor, I would be a student of the academy. Now that I think about it, that kind of life might be more interesting. But after all, the headmaster of the academy is my teacher. The emperor smiled tiredly and looked at her. He said, "Now that my teacher is working in heaven, we still have to work in the human world. After I go with my teacher, do you know what to do?" The empress said, "Your Majesty, rest assured, I know what to do. The emperor said, I asked little Six to be Mr. First disciple because I want him to learn the way of benevolence. If the two children don't mess around, then let them live. The empress stopped crying and said very calmly, I will do these things well. Then I can rest assured. The emperor said, and then slowly closed his eyes. Master Huangyang walked into the room. The empress looked at the emperor, who seemed to be asleep for a long time. Then she took off the rosary on her wrist and put it on his wrist. She bent down and kissed his forehead gently. Master Huangyang put his palms together. After a moment, the chanting of scriptures sounded in the room. The reincarnation scripture. It was also raining in Chang. The rain was heavy and mixed with thunder. Lightning flashed occasionally, illuminating the quiet and empty palace as if it were daytime. Even with a lampshade, the candlelight still swayed restlessly. If there was no lampshade, the candlelight would probably have been extinguished. Liu sat behind the table and looked at the beautiful candlestick next to the pillar. She was a little distracted. Her black hair was slightly wet, and so was her palace dress. She must have gone somewhere in the rain. Her face was a little pale, not because she was afraid of thunder and lightning, but because she believed that what she had done was right. Even if she was in a dark room, she did not feel guilty. Looking at the night rain outside the hall, 2 lines of tears flowed from the corners of her eyes, slid down her pale cheeks, and fell on the memorial on the table, wetting a line of ink. Liu came to her senses and ordered a eunuch to bring a coarse paper dipped in water. She carefully wiped the wet marks on the memorial and then wiped the tears off her face. She calmly and attentively continued to read the memorial. This memorial was a summary of the flood situation in all the counties of the empire. It was very important. She picked up a brush and began to read the memorial. Guarding the dikes, storing water, disaster relief, epidemic prevention, military mobilization, and keeping an eye on the riders in the eastern wilderness. The Tang Empire was very big, and there were many things to do. She had already adapted to it and handled it in an orderly manner. As she continued to read the memorial, her expression became calmer and calmer, even more determined. Late at night, after a busy day of government affairs, Liu put on a cloak and left the palace alone under the heavy protection of Yulin royal guards and guards. She did not bring any eunuchs or palace maids with her. She did not go far, just to the Southern Gate Temple opposite the imperial city. The Southern Gate Temple, shrouded in the heavy rain, seemed particularly desolate and quiet. Liu walked into the Taoist temple. Deep in the black paulownia floor, there was an oil lamp beside the soft mattress, illuminating the gaunt and thin face of the nation master of Tang, Li Qingshan. She walked to Li Qingshan and slowly knelt down. She said in a trembling voice, "Father, I'm leaving." Li Qingshan slowly closed his eyes and then opened them again. There was only sadness in his eyes, not shock. For hundreds of years, Healing City had used the 1,000-mile messenger talisman twice in a row in a few months. The first time was because of the black horse carriage. The second time was to send the news of His Majesty's passing back to Chang and City. At this time, only a few people in the entire Chang and City knew this news. Li relied on the help of the Southern Gate Temple to keep this secret temporarily. Looking at Li Qingshan's expression, she knew that he already knew. Since she relied on the Southern Gate Temple to keep the secret, she naturally could not hide it from the temple master of the Southern Gate Temple. Li Qingshan looked at her kneeling in front of him and said weakly, "What do you want to do?" Liu said, "I want to see the edict." The edict of the succession of the Tang Emperor was not in the palace, but in the Southern Gate Temple. Li Qingshan said, "According to the law of the Tang Empire, the edict should be announced in public before the civil and military officials." Liu looked down at her soaked skirt and said, "The civil and military officials do not know yet." Li Qingshan said, "They will know eventually." Liu said, "I do not want to hide the news of father's passing for too long. I will inform everyone later." Li Qingshan said, "Then why did your highness come here in advance?" After a long silence, Liu said, "Because I am worried." Li Qingshan also fell into a long silence. Liu lowered her head even more, and water droplets dripped from the ends of her black hair. Her body fell along with the water droplets, and her forehead touched the black floor. According to the agreement, there are 2 chapters today. This is the first one. There is still one more. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 700. Please help me. Why should I help your highness? Because I am a Tang. The 6th prince is also a Tang, but his mother is not a Tang. The Tang Empire is open-minded and tolerant. We don't care about these things. Please believe me. Why should I believe your highness? Because you don't believe the empress. Liu looked at the familiar handwriting on the edict and suddenly felt very sad. It was her father's handwriting. Just like the rumors, no matter how much he loved calligraphy and how diligently he practiced, he could not make his handwriting look better. However, from the meticulous handwriting, it could be seen that her father was very calm and determined when he wrote these words, without any hesitation or struggle. Liu's hand holding the edict trembled slightly. She exerted force with her fingers as if they were about to sink into the yellow cloth. The trembling spread from her forearm to her shoulder, and her entire body began to tremble. She felt extremely disappointed and sad, and then began to feel angry, not only because of the content of the edict, but also because of her father's handwriting on the edict was so stable. Why is it like this? She whispered. Then she repeated it again, her voice full of grievance and unwillingness. Why is it like this? Her voice was a little louder than before, but it still could not pass through the Taoist temple and the night rain outside. It was even louder than the sound of her teeth chattering. Li Qingshan said, "This was written by His Majesty before he personally went to war. Since he left the edict, it means that he also vaguely sensed the direction of heaven's will. However, you should also be able to see that he made up his mind a long time ago." Li was silent for a long time. Suddenly, she raised her head and wiped the tears on her face with her sleeve. She looked at Li Qingshan on the sickbed and said with a trembling voice, "Can the edict be changed?" Li Qingshan slightly drooped his eyelids and said, "Generally not." Liu's eyes lit up and she asked, "What is not generally?" Li Qingshan glanced at her and said, "When the country is in danger." Liu asked, "Who can change it?" Li Qingshan said, "I can." The edict of the Tang Emperor could not be easily forged. There was the royal seal and complex emblems on it. Most importantly, there was a unique imprint of the aura of heaven and earth on it. Part of that imprint came from the bloodline of the royal family, and part of it came from the witnesses of the edict. Before His Majesty left Chong, and when he wrote the edict in the Southern Gate Temple, the witnesses were his most trusted master of nation Li Qingshan and his younger brother, Master Huangyan. And the imperial seal was in the palace at this time, on the couch of Liu, who was supervising the country. Looking at Li Qingshan's old and thin face, Liu asked in a trembling voice, "What do you want?" Li Qingshan looked at the slightly wet, beautiful woman before him. He felt like he was looking at the little girl who followed her mother around and acted like a spoiled child. He smiled in reminiscence. Then he said calmly, "I want the Tang Empire to prosper for generations to come. I want the South School of Haotian Taoism to flourish. I want the Tangs to live a carefree life. Your Highness, can you promise me that?" Liu left the Southern Gate Temple. It was believed that the shocking news would soon pass through the storm and reach the mansions of the princes and ministers in Chang'an. Tomorrow was not the day of the Grand Court Conference, but there was bound to be one. In the rain, the Southern Gate was still quiet, as if nothing had happened. The oil lamp was like a bean. It could only illuminate the corner of the Taoist temple. He Mingqi knelt in front of the oil lamp. Half of his body was in the shadow. Li Qingshan lay on the sickbed and looked up. It was as if he could see the rain falling on the Taoist temple. He frowned and sighed. "I changed the edict today and violated the law of the Tang Empire. I also violated His Majesty's last wish. I don't know what will be written in the history books after I die, and how will His Majesty think of me." He Mingqi was silent. It was inappropriate for him to say anything at this time. "But I won't regret it, because Your Highness is right. Rather than saying that I trust her and Prince Hui Yuan, I can't trust the Empress. How can I let the saintess of diabolism become the master of the Tang Empire?" Li Qingshan said indifferently. If it wasn't for her, His Majesty wouldn't have died so young. He Mingqi raised his head and glanced at him. The officials and people in the court all thought that the Empress and the Nation Master were close. Who would have thought that the truth was true? In recent years, there have been too many funerals in Chang'an. Senior statesmen of 3 dynasties and veterans of the battlefield have all passed away. Now His Majesty is dead, and even the headmaster of the academy is dead. If this is not God's will, then what is? Li Qingshan turned to He Mingqi and said, "If I remember correctly, you are from Qinghe Prefecture?" He Mingqi lowered his head and answered, "My family is from the He clan of Qinghe Prefecture." Li Qingshan squinted his eyes and said, "The He clan that once had a great divine priest of West Hill?" He Mingqi said after a moment of silence, "Yes." Li Qingshan looked at his favorite disciple and sighed. He said, "It seems that I was right. You really work for the Hierarch Lord. No wonder you are so interested in the God-stunning array." He Mingqi felt that his body suddenly became very cold. He leaned forward and put his hands on the black wooden floor. He trembled slightly and did not know what to say. The Hierarch Lord wants to lead the papal cavalrymen into Chang and then bring the Tang Empire back to the glory of the West Hill Divine Palace. That's why he wants to break the God-stunning array more than anyone else. Li Qingshan said, "You have been cultivating in the Southern Gate Temple for so many years. Your goal is to find the array pestle. Unfortunately, you have no talent in talisman Taoism, so senior brother Yin Sei could not take you as a disciple. The array pestle was given to Ning Quebec. Now it is in the academy, so you have no way to get it. So you have to go to the small building in the palace to see if there is any other way to break the array." Only then did He Mingqi realize that what he had done these years could not be hidden from his teacher's eyes. Speaking of which, how could the Nation Master of the Tang Empire be so gullible? He asked in a trembling voice, "Since you know all this, why didn't you expose me?" Li Qingshan said, "Because you are my favorite disciple. Because I'm also struggling." Struggling? Xiaohe was born in the Devil's Doctrine, but he became a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism and a general of the Tang Empire. He's been in pain all his life. I believe in Haotian and am loyal to the Tang Empire. How can I not be in pain? In the past, I didn't struggle or feel pain because I didn't have to choose. I knew that if the Great Tang continued down its current path, it would walk very smoothly and well. But now that the situation has undergone a massive change, I want to choose a relatively stable path for the Great Tang. So I chose Your Highness and did not expose you." Li Qingshan said, "People say that Chang and is unbreakable, and the cultivation world praises the power of the God-stunning array. But how many people know that the real unbreakable one is the headmaster? If the headmaster is not dead, you'll be dead now." He looked at He Mingqi and said, "But the headmaster is still dead." This once again proves that Haotian is unbeatable. Haotian Taoism will not let the academy or the Tang Empire off. And this time, without the headmaster, the academy can no longer fight against the whole world as it has for thousands of years. So the Tang Empire will lose. If the Tang Empire wants to survive, it can only return to the embrace of Haotian. I know you have an agreement with Prince Wei Yuan, but don't forget that the Tangs are also believers of Haotian. You're also a Tang, so I hope you can make the process less bloody." He Mingqi was silent for a long time. Then he kowtowed heavily and said, "I will fight for it with my life." The rain continued, but Chang and seemed to have snowed. The 1,000-year-old ancient city turned white overnight. Countless banners fluttered on the streets. The people who stood under the eaves to shelter from the rain looked sorrowful. Many people even wore mourning clothes. Only a small part of this mournful whiteness was dedicated to the headmaster. Because the headmaster was not prominent, not many ordinary people knew that the guardian of the world had left. The people of Chang and mourned and missed the guardian of the Tang Empire. Their kind and wise emperor, who had won the hearts of the people, had passed away. It was worth it in exchange for the cries of countless people. The civil and military officials knelt in the rain in front of the palace hall. The officials' official robes were already wet, and the generals' armors were washed by the rain. A eunuch stood in front of the stone steps and read the edict. Several grand secretaries, ministers, and important generals stood behind the eunuch. Their expressions were different. Some were surprised, some were pleasantly surprised, but the bottom line was sadness. The Tang Empire had not had time to wake up from its sadness before it welcomed its new master. Li Huiyuan walked to the chair in the center of the hall and sat down. From this moment on, he was no longer a prince, but the emperor. His face was still unhealthy pale, but he was no longer immature, nor did he look unnaturally noble. The indifference in his eyes had long turned into majesty, but his expression was natural and gentle. It was not until then that the officials of the Tang Empire realized that the prince had grown up. Looking at the new emperor, who was gradually becoming more and more valiant, sitting on the chair, there was an old minister who was the only one left. Looking at the face that resembled his father, he was moved to tears. The officials and generals on the queen's side knelt down with their colleagues. They were silent and respectful, but their hearts were heavy. They even had doubts about the edict. However, the edict could not be forged, so their doubts had no evidence. They could only wait for the queen to bring another prince back to Chang, and with the coffin of the former emperor. Before that, they could only place their hopes on two places that could change everything. A minister went to the academy, but the academy closed its doors and did not receive any guests. The minister then remembered that the headmaster of the academy had passed away. A minister went to the Southern Gate Temple. Later, people in the court learned that the edict of the emperor was kept there, so they wanted to ask the nation master, Li Qingshan. The door of the Southern Gate Temple opened, and he Mingxi walked out with a white cloth belt around his waist. The nation master, Li Qingshan, had passed away. From now on, he was the new Abbey Dean of the Southern Gate Temple and also the master of the South School of Haoyin Taoism. There are many great reviews in the book review section. Some are about the headmaster of the academy, some are about Sang Sang, some are about the general trend of the world, and some are about Ning Kei's future battle. If you're interested, you can go and read it. It's very good. Tomorrow is Saturday, and there will be no updates. I will also take a good rest. I was wrong when I said I would take a break. On the day I said I would take a break, I updated 3 chapters. Please understand. In addition, I will continue to publish on Sunday. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 701. The rain suddenly stopped. Just when everyone in the world thought that the rain would never stop, the rain that had lasted for many days came to an abrupt end on an ordinary autumn day. At first, no one believed it at all. People walked out of the palaces, out of the fields under the eaves, and into the small courtyards. They looked up at the sky in confusion until they realized that there was no more water dripping from the clouds. Only then did they realize what had happened. Cheers rang out in every corner of the fields and cities. However, the entire world had been soaked in this heavy rain for too long. People's clothes and moods seemed to have become moldy. After the surprise and excitement, exhaustion quickly came. The relief workers continued to provide relief. The dazed ones continued to daze, and those who slept turned around and went to bed. Everything seemed so numb. After the rain stopped, the clouds naturally dispersed. At night, people gathered around the dining table to discuss the rain. After finishing their chores, they returned to their respective rooms to sleep, entering the first dreamland after the rain. The night clouds that had covered the sky for many days gradually dispersed. A dog barked in the streets. The black dog's barking seemed very frightened and very uneasy. A dog barked in the fields. The thin yellow dog's barking seemed very confused and afraid. More and more dogs barked. All the dogs in the world seemed to have received some kind of command. They all barked at the same time. The barking echoed in the cities and the countryside, waking countless people from their dreams. People rubbed their sleepy eyes and walked out of their rooms. Some people held anti-theft wooden sticks. Some people complained that their daughters-in-law had forgotten to feed the dogs today. They took the food bowls to find their dogs. Only then did they realize that it was not only their dogs that were barking, but all the dogs were barking. All the dogs were barking at the night sky. People curiously followed the eyes of the dogs and forgot about the night sky. The wooden sticks in their hands slipped the food bowls in their hands slipped and fell on their feet. However, they did not seem to feel any pain. Everyone was shocked. Their attention was completely attracted by the object in the night sky. Even if the house behind them caught fire, it would be difficult for them to wake up, let alone their feet being smashed. After many days, the rain clouds dispersed, revealing the clean night sky. However, in the night sky, there were no stars in the past, only a white, round, bright object. What was that? There was a strange phenomenon in the sky. The night moon hung high in the sky. This strange and horrifying scene shocked all the humans, causing them to feel fear and uneasiness. Many people fainted from fright, and even more people knelt in their own courtyards or in front of their windows, worshiping. The royal families of various countries burned incense and worshipped the night, praying for Hao-Ian's forgiveness for the disrespect of human beings. Many Taoist temples and temples were full of incense, and rumors began to spread in the human world that this was a precursor to the invasion of the underworld. It immediately caused a disaster even greater than the continuous rainstorm and floods, and many foolish people even chose to commit suicide. The West Hill Divine Palace announced to the world as quickly as possible that the object in the night sky was called the moon. It was a divine light bestowed by Hao-Ian, who pitted the people of the world for enduring the eternal night. With the spread of the decree of the Divine Hall and the forceful suppression of the royal families of various countries, the uproar caused by the thing called the moon slightly calmed down. As time passed, the people in the world began to get used to its existence. People discovered that the moon was different from the stars in the night sky in the past countless years. It was not absolutely silent and solemn. Instead, it moved and changed according to a certain pattern. There was the difference between brightness and brightness, and the change of shape was relatively stable. It was very suitable for calculating time and arranging farming work. Some people began to use the waxing and waning of the moon to calculate time and shortened it to the moon. Of course, this was all in the future. There was a purple mountain in the southeast of Chang, and city of the Tang Empire. The terrain was relatively high, and there were relatively few rain clouds. It was convenient for watching the stars and the sky, so the imperial astronomer was set up here. Although the Tang Empire had been using Tianqi for more than a decade, the Tangs were famous for not believing in heaven and fate. Therefore, the imperial astronomer became the least important institution in the imperial court, and also the quietest yamen. Usually, there were few visitors, except for young couples who came to the Purple Mountain to enjoy the scenery. Today, the outside of the imperial astronomer was very lively. Dozens of Yulin royal guards surrounded several officials, standing below the stone steps, cutting off the connection between the inside and outside. Occasionally, passers-by passed by, but they were not surprised to see this scene and did not think of other places. There was an extra moon in the night, so of course the imperial court had to ask the imperial astronomer for its opinion. The officials from the Ministry of Rites and the Yulin royal guards did not enter the imperial astronomer. Instead, it was a chief eunuch and several strong servant eunuchs who entered. Strangely, no one came to greet them. The chief eunuch looked gloomy and stared at the closed door of the main hall. He said coldly, "His Majesty is waiting for your reply, and the imperial court is waiting for your deduction and comments. You have to give them a reply today." The atmosphere in the imperial astronomer was extremely depressing and tense. In the main hall of the imperial astronomer, there were many instruments used for stargazing. Walking through the side door and straight up to the balcony, one could even see a huge sky telescope that the Academy had just sent over last year. At this moment, on the small table in the hall, there were only a few plates of very common dishes and several jars of wine. Two very depressed people were sitting there, drinking without tasting anything. One of them was the supervisor Miao Kechi, and the other was the deputy supervisor Su Yansho. They were the two most important officials in the imperial astronomer. The cold voice of the eunuch came from outside the door. "You imperial astronomer have always thought that you could understand the will of heaven. Back then, you ignored the anger of the former emperor and insisted on commenting. Now that there is a strange phenomenon today, you can't say anything?" Miao Kechi looked at the closed door and revealed a gloomy smile. He drank the wine in his cup and looked at Su Yangsho. Did you hear that? After all, it is still because of what happened back then. Su Yangsho was silent, holding the wine pot and filling up his cup for him. That year, I observed the celestial phenomena and learned something, so I wrote 8 words on the almanac. Night covers the stars. The country will not be at peace. His Majesty ordered me to erase these 8 words for the stability of the court, but I refused. Meow Kechi sighed and said, "Who would have thought that these 8 words would cause such a stir?" Countless people died in the palace and in the court. The princess was forced to marry into the wilderness, and the empress has not been involved in political affairs since then. Countless people want me dead. It's only because His Majesty looks after me that I can live to this day. He picked up the wine cup and stared blankly for a while. Then he brought it to his lips and slowly drank it. He said with a dull expression, "Now that His Majesty has passed away, who can protect me?" Su Yangsho looked at His Excellency's expression and knew that he was ready to die. He felt slightly nervous and sincerely persuaded. Now that the new emperor has ascended the throne, Her Royal Highness is still in charge of the country, but the Empress and the 6th Prince have not returned. Whether it is His Majesty or Her Royal Highness, they are not willing to cause discussion in this situation. If it is light, it will cause opposition. If it is heavy, it will shake the country. Meow Kechi looked at him quietly and said, "Her Highness has always been virtuous. Of course, she will not force me to die because of what happened in the past. But you should know what she only wants to hear about this bright moon." Su Yangsho was silent. As the aide-de-camp of the imperial astronomer, he was very clear of Her Highness's intentions. Since in that starless night, the imperial astronomer's annotation had been directed at Her Highness, then now that the moon was in the sky, why couldn't the imperial astronomer do the same and point at the empress who had yet to return to the capital? In reality, I have watched the stars for so many years. Other than that night when the stars dimmed, I have not seen any other changes in the stars. So the job of stargazing in the imperial astronomer is really meaningless. For some reason, Meow Kechi's mood suddenly improved. He repeatedly raised his cup to persuade and said with a slightly tipsy tone, "But this moon is different. Look at the waxing and waning of the moon in the night sky. It is orderly and has subtle changes in between. Whether it is to study the calendar or to observe the sky, there is great potential. It is a pity that I do not have much chance." Hearing this, Su Yangsho couldn't help but feel a wave of nervousness. He repeatedly urged, "Since Her Highness is kind and virtuous, why don't you take advantage of the situation?" Meow Kechi's eyes widened and stared into his eyes. He said in a low voice, "In the beginning, the imperial astronomer was held by the grand scribe. It was because the will of heaven and the people's hearts cannot be deceived in the history books. Why did I make that annotation against my will? According to the laws of the Tang Empire and the old rules passed down by the Ministry of Personnel, if I pass away, you will be the supervisor of the imperial astronomer. Now I am forced into a corner because I have a good-for-nothing son who has been blackmailed by the siblings in the palace. But you are different. You are upright in body and mind and have no ties. After I pass away, you cannot bring shame to the imperial astronomer." Su Yangsho was silent for a long time and gently nodded. Seeing this, Meow Kechi breathed a sigh of relief and slowly said, "The former emperor's reign was called Tianqi. Many people don't know the true reason behind it. Even I don't know. Now it seems that the headmaster of the academy has passed away, His Majesty has returned to heaven, and all the old ministers and pillars have followed suit. This is probably the original meaning of Tianqi. The will of heaven cannot be defied." Meow Kechi's voice suddenly became stern. He said, "But the people's hearts cannot be deceived. Even if man cannot defeat heaven, but we can choose not to follow heaven. What can heaven do to us?" The door to the main hall of the imperial astronomer finally opened. Looking at the body of Meow Kechi, the supervisor of the imperial astronomer who had committed suicide by drinking poison wine, the chief eunuch's face became extremely ugly. His voice became more and more shrill and trembling, extremely unpleasant to hear. "How dare you? How dare you? How dare you commit suicide to escape punishment? Su Liangshu stood at the side and watched the scene expressionlessly. He thought of what His Excellency had said before committing suicide and looked at the furious eunuch. He could not help but reveal a mocking smile. A person who did not even care about his life was certainly courageous enough. How could a person who was not even afraid of death be afraid of punishment? He did not even care about his life. Even Hao Ian could not do anything to him. What could the siblings in the palace do to him? Today there are 4 chapters. This is the first chapter. There's still 3 chapters to go. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 702. When the officials from the Ministry of Rites learned of the death of the imperial astronomer, Sir Miao, they left in a hurry, their expressions complicated. The chief eunuch indicated for Su Liangshu to follow him into the side room and sat down on a chair. With a dark and ugly expression, he said, "Do you know what to do next?" Su Liangshu said respectfully, "Please enlighten me, eunuch." The chief eunuch lightly tapped the table and said, "I don't know the art of stargazing, so I'll listen to you." After a moment of silence, Su Liangshu said, "Gong Gong, do you really want me to write it?" The leader of the eunuchs was extremely anxious and shouted, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and get this done." Su Liangshu no longer hesitated. He walked to the table and wrote down 8 words. "The dark moon has invaded the stars, and the country will not be at peace." Many years ago, the imperial astronomer of the Tang dynasty observed the sudden darkening of the starry night and wrote these words. Many years later, when the moon appeared in the night sky, the official of the imperial astronomer wrote another 8 words without even looking at it. The chief eunuch's expression was extremely ugly. It was so gloomy that it seemed like water was about to drip out. The anger in his eyes was like a flame. He gritted his teeth and said, "What does Lord Su mean by this?" Su Liangshu said calmly, "I am the deputy of the imperial astronomer. After the death of His Excellency, according to the laws of the Tang Empire and related regulations, the order of succession does not need to be discussed by the court. Since you wanted to comment, I will do it. What's wrong with that?" The head eunuch was so angry that he laughed. Pointing at Su Kei's nose, he laughed dryly and said, "What a good Lord Su." Su Liangshu's expression suddenly turned serious. He knocked away the eunuch's skinny finger and shouted sternly, "I called you Gong Gong and asked you to clarify. Calling yourself lowly official is just giving some face to the nobles in the palace. I'm a dignified 4th-rank official. How dare a mere eunuch like you treat me with such disrespect? How dare you? How dare you?" The chief eunuch trembled in anger. "Do you want to die?" Su Liangshu's face was as cold as ice as he shouted, "Die? Do you really think that the laws of the Tang Empire are just for show? Let me tell you and the noble behind you that I am not Sir Miao. I do not have an unfilial son who accidentally killed people in a street brawl, nor do I have an elder brother-in-law who is corrupt and take bribes. I'm all alone. It won't be that easy for me to die. Get lost." As soon as he finished speaking, he slapped the eunuch's face heavily. The applause was resounding. The Imperial Center Administration of the Tang Empire was responsible for managing the cultivators on behalf of the imperial court. In the hearts of ordinary people and even ordinary officials, this institution seemed very mysterious. But the location of the Imperial Center Administration was not mysterious. It was just a little remote. It was in a small building 4 miles to the east of Vermilion Bird Avenue, facing the garden of the military ministry. After the continuous rain, it seemed that it would not rain again in a short period of time. But today, there was a yellow paper umbrella on the table on the 3rd floor of the Imperial Center Administration. The surface of the umbrella was slightly wet. He Mingshi held a piece of snow-white silk cloth and carefully and slowly wiped the water droplets on the umbrella, as if he did not see the sweat on Zhuge Warren's forehead. Zhuge Warren was the chief official of the Tang Empire's Imperial Center Administration. Everyone knew that he was a loyal dog of the Empress. When the new emperor ascended the throne, his situation inevitably became passive and panicky. As the saying goes, every emperor has his own ministers. Lord Zhuge should have known about the changes in the situation long ago. Why are you still running around in vain? Do you want to overthrow the edict of the late emperor? It's very unwise. He Mingshi put the silk cloth into his sleeve, raised his head, and said calmly to the opposite side. Zhuge Warren looked at the young man in Taoist robes opposite him, and the sweat on his forehead increased. He had never thought that his whereabouts these days were all under the other party's control. He was actually very familiar with He Mingshi. In the past few years, as the main source of power for the Imperial Center Administration, the Southern Gate Temple, He Mingshi had always been responsible for cooperating with him. He had always respected He Mingshi, but it was mainly because he respected his sect and his teacher, who was the nation master. It was not until today that he realized that he was wrong. What He Mingshi respected the most was himself. What are you trying to say, Master He? I'm just drinking tea and chatting with some old friends. If you want to frame me and overthrow the edict of the late emperor, I can't accept it. Zhuge Warren's voice was a little hoarse. When He Mingshi walked slowly into the Imperial Center Administration, he did not hear any warning. His voice was almost hoarse because he knew that no matter what he said, it would be difficult to be heard. The reason why the late emperor agreed to the empress's suggestion to let you be the supervisor of the Imperial Center Administration was because you were an ordinary person. You did not sympathize with cultivators, nor did you have the innate reverence other ordinary people had for cultivators. This was an advantage, but also a fatal weakness. He Mingshi said, after so many years, which cultivator in the Imperial Center Administration would sincerely obey you? Once you don't have the authority in your hands, you can't order them at all. Zhuge Warren felt that the person sitting in front of him was a poisonous snake. He said, I really did not expect that the Southern Gate Temple's infiltration of the Imperial Center Administration would be so terrifying. But don't forget, I am still the supervisor. Although those people did not dare to stop you from coming to see me, they did not have the guts to help you kill me. He Mingshi looked at him with pity and said, I am a cultivator. Although I am not as great as Ning Ke and Chen Pippi, why would I need help to kill an ordinary person like you? Zhuge Warren shouted sternly, I don't believe you have the guts to kill an official of the imperial court. He Mingshi said, I do not dare, but Lord Zhuge, do not forget that the new emperor has already ascended the throne. He only needs to issue an imperial decree to take away your official position. By then, what will you have left? More beads of sweat appeared on Zhuge Warren's forehead. He said, in that case, what are you waiting for? His Majesty has just ascended the throne, and he wants to kill the Empress's loyal dog. This will not look good in the eyes of the court officials. Moreover, you have been in charge of the Imperial Center Administration for many years. I believe you have some secrets and unknown powers. His Majesty does not want unnecessary losses because of the conflict between the Emperor and his officials. He Mingshi looked at him and said with a smile, so His Majesty wants you to resign. Zhuge Warren stared at him and said mockingly, do you think I am so stupid? This has nothing to do with stupidity. It has to do with the current situation. Even if you still have some trump cards that are not in our control, the general situation is already in our control. You can't overturn the sky. He Mingshi stopped smiling and said, Lord Zhuge is grieving over the death of the previous emperor and is suffering from a serious illness. He sincerely asked to resign. His Majesty and Her Highness will pity you for your hard work and allow you to live in Chang'an. If His Majesty takes away your official position, you'll be sent to another county. Zhuge Warren's hands trembled slightly when he heard this. It seems that Lord Zhuge is also very clear about the difference. Yes, you have followed the Empress all your life and done many dirty things. You have ordered cultivators around like pigs and dogs and offended many sections. If you do not have the support of the imperial court, as long as you leave Chang, and you will only be left with a dead end. After saying this, He Mingshi picked up the yellow paper umbrella from the table and put it under his armpit. He walked out of the Imperial Center Administration. There was no sound of wind or rain outside the hall tonight. Liu felt a little uncomfortable and her mood was a little unsettled. She read a few memorials but could not calm down. She did not even clearly see what was written in the memorials. Now that her brother had ascended to the throne, her position as regent should have been invalid. However, Both the new emperor and the officials of the two factions in the imperial court had a tacit understanding and asked her to continue to be the regent. The emperor wanted her to continue to review the memorials because he believed in his sister's ability in government affairs and to express his gratitude and closeness. The officials of the princess's faction insisted on this because they did not trust the new emperor's ability in government affairs. As for the officials of the empress's faction, who knew what they were secretly thinking, Liu casually flipped through the thick memorials. Suddenly, her fingers froze and her expression became solemn. This was because at the bottom of the memorials, she saw Zhuge Warren's resignation. The candlelight shone on the table and the screen, as well as on her uncertain face. Looking at the resignation of the loyal dog of the Empress, she thought of many things that had happened in the imperial court recently. Since the new emperor ascended the throne, Chang and seemed to be stable, but in fact, there were undercurrents surging under the surface. Those ministers and generals who were still loyal to the Empress often contacted each other privately. The contents of their conversations could be guessed without asking. There was also a big dispute in the imperial court. The palace was determined to change the year name as soon as possible and completely confirm the matter of a new emperor's succession. The officials of the Empress's faction, on the other hand, used the reason that the former emperor's coffin had not returned and the Empress Dowager was far away in the wilderness, strongly requested for the change to be delayed, at least until the former emperor was buried. The reason for putting filial piety first was very sufficient. Neither Liu nor His Majesty could stop it. They could only agree with the suggestion of the court officials and decided to send a team to Healan City to welcome the coffin when the rain stopped. Liu was very clear about the importance of changing the year name to the throne. This was originally the first major event after the new emperor ascended the throne. In the end, they were forced to return without accomplishing anything. Therefore, she guessed that her brother would be very angry. However, she did not expect that he would start to act without her knowing. Under the illumination of the candlelight, she carefully read Zhuge Warren's resignation. She wanted to see something deeper in the details of the resignation, but she found nothing. Because the former emperor's coffin had not returned, the new emperor did not move into the main hall. He still lived in the side hall of the previous years. However, the side hall now was much more lively and prosperous than the main hall. Tonight, the palace suddenly became quiet again. Other than the two most trusted chief eunuchs guarding the door, there was no one else in the quiet hall except for the sister and brother. Back then, I heard from my father that ruling a country is like frying a small fish. Don't flip it casually. Let nature take its course and act cautiously. Don't be impatient. Liu looked at her brother and softly persuaded, "You are now the emperor of the Tang Empire. As long as you go with the flow, those clowns can't shake you at all. Why do you act rashly?" Li Huiyuan said with a smile, "I was wondering what it was that made you so nervous and cautious." It turned out to be a resignation. Yes, I sent someone to make Zhuge Warren resign. Everyone in the Tang Empire knows that the sinister villain is a dog of that woman. I don't want to see that hateful face in the palace again. Liu looked at his expression and knew that he did not take her words to heart. She said solemnly, "You have to know that Chang and cannot be broken from the outside. The only danger comes from within. Your Majesty, you are now Chang'an. As long as you don't mess up, you can last for thousands of years." Hearing these sincere words, Li Huiyuan lowered his head and was silent for a long time. Then he looked up at Liu and said, "In fact, I also understand this. But as you said, the danger of Chang is inside." During the 2 days when the edict was read, the minister of the Ministry of Rites went to the Southern Gate Temple and Zhuge Warren went to the Academy. "Don't you know what they want to do?" Liu was silent. She was not worried about the Southern Gate Temple, especially after the death of the nation master Li Qingshan. It was impossible for anyone to know what happened that night. However, the Academy had never expressed its attitude, which was what really made her feel uneasy. The Academy had always been closed. Not to mention the ministers loyal to the Queen, even the messengers she sent could only see the ordinary staff of the Academy. Not even a professor could be seen. If it was because of the death of the headmaster of the Academy, It was understandable that the academy was closed. But what were the professors doing? What were the people on the second floor of the academy who were qualified to influence the imperial court doing now? Sister, those people can't be reconciled. They would rather die than admit that Father chose me to succeed the throne. They will only think that we are weak if we are lenient to these unscrupulous people. Li Huiyuan looked at his sister and said fiercely. Hearing this, Li Yu's heart trembled. In fact, until this moment, Li Huiyuan really thought that the name on the edict was his. He had no idea what she had sacrificed for it. At this time, Li Huiyuan's self-confidence was like a kind of mockery to her, a mockery of herself. She suddenly felt sad and tired. She didn't want to continue this topic, but she suddenly remembered the news she had heard when she was walking in the palace. She frowned and said, "What about the imperial astronomer?" Li Huiyuan was startled and didn't know how to answer. Seeing this, Li Yu knew that it was true. She scolded him severely. Miao Kechi was upright and had a good reputation in the imperial court. You actually sent an internal official to force him to death. Do you want to turn against the officials? Li Huiyuan lowered his head and was silent for a long time. Then he said, I did make a mistake in this matter. Li Yu knew that her brother had a very stubborn side. She didn't expect him to admit his mistake so quickly. She couldn't help but be stunned. However, before she could react, Li Huiyuan raised his head. He said calmly and firmly, but I won't regret it because I want him to die. Li Yu looked at him and asked, Why? Why? It was Miao Kechi, the old bastard, who annotated those damn words and forced you to marry far away. I will never forget the night you knelt in front of Father's palace. I will never forget the tears you shed on the night before you got married. Li Huiyuan looked at his sister and said coldly, So he must die. There are 2 more chapters. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 703. Of course, Li Yu didn't forget the night when she knelt in front of her father's palace and asked to be married to the wilderness. She didn't forget the night when she cried silently before she got married. But as time went by, she buried the sadness in her heart and sometimes even thought that she had forgotten it. She didn't expect that her brother, who was still young at that time, would always remember those things. He hid it in his heart for so many years and finally broke out after he ascended the throne. At this moment, apart from being touched and a touch of sadness, what else could she feel? Naturally, she couldn't reprimand him again. Besides Miao Kechi, there's also that woman. If she hadn't added fuel to the flames around Father, if her ministers hadn't added fuel to the fire, how could the imperial astronomer's commentary have caused such a big turmoil? How could you have been forced to marry those abominable barbarians in the wilderness? Li Huiyuan's voice became colder and colder. He reached out to hold Li Yu's hand and said, Don't worry, sister. Now that I'm the emperor of the Tang Empire, no one dares to bully me and you like before. Miao Kechi's death is just the beginning. I will also make that woman stay in Healan City and never return to Chang'an. Hearing this, Li Yu suddenly came to her senses. She held his hand tightly and stared into his eyes. She said with a very serious expression, I have already made arrangements in Healan City. You must not mess around. After all, in name, that woman is our mother and now the Empress Dowager. If you want to do something to her, you need the right time and reason. She must return to Chang'an. What we need to do now is to delay her return. Li Huiyuan had something to say. Li Yu shook her head and looked at him seriously. I know there are rumors in Chang and City that the edict is fake, so you're a little uneasy, but rumors can only be rumors. I also know that Lord Su wrote that the Dark Moon invaded the Star Empire and the country will not be peaceful. That was just what he did when he was angry. Don't make things difficult for him. Your Majesty, you must remember that the edict is not the key. That woman is not the key, and the Imperial Astronomer's commentary is not the key. The key is who the civil and military officials in the court and the people support. Li Yu's words made sense. As an emperor, he should have this kind of breadth of mind and magnanimity. Even if he needed means to govern, he could not rely on those petty means. But she didn't make it clear. The edict and the Imperial Astronomer were not the key. But the Empress in Healan City was the key to Li Huiyuan's throne. Besides that, the most important thing was the attitude of the military and the academy. Li was most worried about the academy and that woman in Healan City. At this moment, she suddenly began to miss Ning Quebec. If Ning Ke were still in Chong, and everything would be much smoother. However, his father liked Ning Ke very much, and Ning Ke must have some true feelings for his father. If he knew that Ning Ke had tampered with his father's edict, would his attitude toward Ning Ke change? The light carriage moved silently in the darkness of the imperial palace, and finally stopped in front of a quiet hall. Liu got off the carriage and waved to the eunuchs and palace maids not to follow her into the palace. This palace had a special status in the imperial palace. It was the bedroom of the empress. Liu felt that she was a little weak at this time, so she came here. Every time she came to this palace, she would always feel a lot of anger, and anger would often turn into strength. The owner of this palace was still far away in Healan City and had not returned. So there were only a few candles in the hall, and it was a little dark. Even so, the magnificent furnishings in the hall could still be seen clearly. The palace maids and eunuchs in the hall were all driven out. So there was only Li Yu in the hall at this time. She stood quietly in front of the phoenix bed embroidered with brocade and inlaid with jade. Suddenly, there was a hint of mockery on her face. Her mother should have been the real and only empress, but she had been sick and died many years ago. She had never slept on this phoenix bed that should have belonged to her. The woman who slept on this bed was very beautiful and gentle. From her father to her uncle to second uncle Chow, everyone had persuaded her to call her mother when she was young. But she had never called her mother. It was not until she grew up that she began to call her mother. Every time she called her mother, a drop of blood would flow from her heart. For more than 10 years, there were many mottled scars on her heart, and she had never really recovered. She had to admit that her father and that woman did not treat her too badly. But she could not forgive them because she always remembered the day her mother died. That day, she greeted her mother happily and climbed in a bed to play with her newborn brother. Then, for some reason, her mother began to cough up blood in pain and then closed her eyes. The imperial physicians kept going in and out, but her mother still did not open her eyes. But her father was not there. Her father was beside that woman. Liu stood quietly on the ground and looked at the phoenix bed. She did not know if she saw her mother or that woman. Her fists slowly clenched and her body began to tremble. This was the feeling of anger. With the trembling caused by anger, that familiar power returned to her body. She gradually calmed down and turned to walk out of the hall. Even if that woman returned to Chong and City, she could not sleep on this bed again. After returning to her palace, Liu continued to review the memorials. Her efficiency was much higher than before, but there were too many memorials, and it was obvious that she could not finish them in a short time. She rubbed her eyebrows tiredly and ordered a eunuch to serve her a cup of strong tea. Then, she ordered a maid to wet a towel with boiling water and soak her face. She felt a little refreshed. When she finally finished reviewing all the memorials, the morning light penetrated through the hall door. She rubbed her sore wrists and ignored the eunuch's persuasion. She ordered someone to invite 2 people into the palace to talk. Everything that had happened in the court over the past few days had been within her expectations. However, she had not expected His Majesty to be so impatient. Although she did not agree with the Emperor's tough methods, she would not lower her vigilance against the Empress's ministers. Under the current circumstances, she must first firmly control Chong and City. The most important thing to control Chong and City was the army. The Yulin Royal Guards were the most important, followed by the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. As for the bodyguard office responsible for the palace's security, it was also the most important. Once there was chaos, in addition to the army, there was another place in Chong and City that was very important. That was the Chong and local government, which had enough bailiffs and arresters and was familiar with the city's terrain. So, one of the 2 people she wanted to see was the prefectural magistrate of Chong and City, Shangguan Yangyu. There was another man named Chao Xiaoshu. There's one more chapter. It may be a little later. I'm a little tired. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 704. Shangguan Yangyu was the ugliest prefectural magistrate of Chang, and since the founding of the Tang Empire 1,000 years ago, he had a natural wretchedness from the inside out. Being famous for his ugly appearance naturally did not make people happy. However, neither he nor his old wife could deny this point. Therefore, as he stood in the grand and solemn hall, he felt increasingly ashamed of his inferiority. More and more sweat appeared on his forehead, and his triangular eyes flickered incessantly. Liu had seen Shangguan Yangyu several times and knew that he was extremely ugly. However, every time she saw him, she always felt that this person's ugliness seemed to have a new meaning. She could not help but feel disgusted, but she controlled her expression very well, and her speech was extremely respectful, as warm as the spring breeze. The reason for this was that she was very clear that the magistrate had a very rare strength and talent under such an unbearable appearance. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to stay in this critical and thorny position for so many years. Li was very practical. As long as there was a real talent, even if Shangguan Yangyu's character was as ugly as his appearance, and he was extremely cunning and corrupt, she would still accept him. Moreover, even if Shangguan Yangyu had many shortcomings, there was a good story about him. After he obtained the scholarly honors, he did not abandon his plain-looking wife, and he still had a deep relationship with her. This made Liu admire him very much. In addition, the position of prefectural magistrate of Chang was very important. Therefore, after the new emperor ascended the throne, he was the first minister she met in the palace. Logically speaking, this was a heaven-sent opportunity for Shangguan Yangyu. For someone like him who had never cared about morality, there was no psychological barrier for him to become the disciple of the princess and the new emperor. Faced with the vague solicitation from Her Highness's words, he should immediately bow to them. However, what surprised Liu and the few people in the hall was that although Shangguan Yangyu's attitude was respectful and kept flattering her, and he even wanted to lie on the ground to kiss Liu's feet, once the conversation became a little deeper, he would open his eyes wide like an idiot and did not know what to say at all. Liu frowned slightly. Of course, she knew that Shangguan Yangyu would not be so stupid that he could not understand what she said. So, this person's pretending to be stupid could only mean that his and some of the minister's attitudes were not firm enough. What made her even more depressed was that the second person she wanted to see today refused to enter the palace. The leader of the eunuchs and the old mama were incessantly reprimanding that man for his disrespect. Their expressions were indignant, as if they were itching to immediately send the Yulin royal guards to capture that man and bring him into the palace to be punished. All of you shut up. Liu shouted and waved her hand to chase all the eunuchs, palace maids, and the nanny closest to her out of the hall. Cao Xiaoshu was not an ordinary person. Even if she had such status and power, she still did not dare to be impolite, let alone think about hurting this person. He was the leader of the underworld in Chang'an. Even though he had not been involved in the affairs of Jianghu for many years and had not paid attention to the affairs of the Fish Dragon Gang since he returned to Chang, and last year, everyone knew that the dark world of Chang and was still under his rule. However, if Cao Xiaoshu was just a big shot in Jianghu, any minister in the court would not take a second look at him. Naturally, Liu would not be so troubled. The key was that Cao Xiaoshu was a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state and had a brotherly relationship with her father. When she saw him, she had to call him second Uncle Cao. It was also because Cao Xiaoshu had many good brothers who were willing to die for him. In some ways, those good brothers were related to the safety of Chang'an. After the eunuchs and palace maids were chased out, Liu was not the only one left in the hall. There was also a middle-aged minister. It was Mo Han, the Grand Secretary of the Martial Heroic Hall, who had entered the cabinet 4 years ago. Your Highness, you don't have to worry for the time being. Cao Xiaoshu's refusal to enter the palace does not mean that he has any opinion of your Highness. Back then, when he refused the official position granted by His Majesty and left the palace, he had already shown his attitude. Today is just a continuation of that day. He wants Your Highness to understand his determination not to participate in the court affairs. Mo Han said with a smile. Liu frowned slightly and said, Chong San and Fei Lu are popular in the Yulin Royal Guards. Lu Wu is now the commander of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. After Chun Chi returned to the bodyguard office, he became Su Chongshan's right-hand man. These people only follow Chao Xiaoshu's orders. If father was still alive, they would not dare to have any disloyalty. But now that father has passed away, if Chao Xiaoshu had any ideas, Chang'an would be in danger. I didn't want to give orders to others. Mo Han's smile faded, and he asked, Then how does Your Highness think we should deal with Chao Xiaoshu? Liu was silent for a long time. She understood what the Grand Secretary meant, and said, This is an old matter arranged by father. It can only be changed with time. Neither I nor Her Majesty can deal with it. Mo Han said approvingly, That's right. His Majesty established the Fish Dragon Gang among the people. It seemed insignificant and was even criticized by the censor as nonsense. But who would have thought that the people in the Fish Dragon Gang have become such important figures now? These people will only be loyal to the former emperor, so they will definitely be loyal to the heir appointed by the former emperor, which is our emperor. Your Highness does not need to do anything. You just need to follow the old practice and maintain the good relationship with the family. I think Chao Xiaoshu will naturally understand Your Highness's intentions. Liu said, The Grand Secretary's words make sense. I will make arrangements later. Except for the former emperor, no one can interfere with the Yulin Royal Guards, the Valiant Cavalry Battalion, and the Bodyguard Office, including Her Majesty and the Prince. So many people died in the Spring Breeze Pavilion that rainy night. It was the former emperor who announced this. So in my opinion, there is no problem with the safety of Chang'an. Mo Han's expression gradually became serious, and he said, What I am worried about is the outside of the country. It is said that on the wilderness, the headmaster drew his sword and fought with Hao Yin. That is why the West Hill Coalition army turned against each other. Although the former emperor led the cavalry to defeat the enemy, now that the headmaster and the former emperor have passed away, the West Hill Divine Palace will definitely not miss this opportunity. Although the Tang Empire is strong, it has become the public enemy of the world. We are surrounded by strong enemies. If we are not careful, we will fall into a precarious situation. It is reported that Prince Longqing has led the cavalry of the Left King's Palace to fight against the Tang Empire, and is preparing to use the Yin Road to go south. Your Highness should advise His Majesty to think more about the military and horses, and not these trivial matters in the court. With the foreign enemies in front of us, we must not cause internal strife. Liu knew that the Grand Secretary was referring to the Imperial Astronomer and the Imperial Center Administration. She was slightly shocked and grateful that the Grand Secretary could point out His Majesty's mistakes. She said, Rest assured, Grand Secretary. I will talk to His Majesty. Mo Han nodded and said, That's good. Liu said again, You don't have to worry too much about the Left King's Palace fighting against the Tang Empire. Everyone knows that Longqing is aiming for the throne of the Yin Kingdom by using the Yin Road to go south. Crown Prince Chongming and I have a deep friendship and have already expected this. General Xian Zhilong is wise and resourceful. He will naturally know what to do. As a civil official who had been supported by the princess in recent years, Mo Han was naturally the most trusted of all. Of course, he knew that Xian Zhilong was Her Highness's man, so he was slightly relieved. We can ignore the conflict at the border of the Yin territory for now. What I'm really worried about is the north. Mo Han said worriedly, now that Her Majesty is still in Heilin City. The position of the northern military camp is even more special. We can't mess up, but we can't ignore it either. Does Your Highness have any arrangements for this? The northern military camp guarded the countless miles of the northern border of the Tang Empire. It had the most elite cavalry and bore the most dangerous mission. It had been confronting the powerful Golden Palace for many years. The current commander of the northern military camp was Su Qi, one of the 4 great generals of the Tang Empire. This general had always been calm and low-key. He was the most inconspicuous. However, Whether it was Li Huiyuan who wanted to sit on the throne or the Tang Empire who wanted to fight against the whole world, Su Qi was an important figure that could not be ignored or bypassed. Among the former four great generals, Xia Ho, the Defender General of the army, was a trusted follower of the queen. The current Defender General of the North, Xian Zhilong, was Li Yu's man. Only the Defender General of the state, Su Shi and Su Qi, were not biased. They were loyal and only loyal to the Tang Emperor, Li Zhongyi. What Grand Secretary Mo Han was worried about now was whether General Su Qi's loyalty to the former emperor could be transferred to the current emperor, or would it be transferred to another prince? Li Yu said, "General Su Qi will never participate in the succession of the throne. This is what my father told me a long time ago. So I believe he will remain neutral." And Mo Han shook his head and said, "Since His Majesty has already ascended the throne, it is inappropriate for the general to remain neutral." Li Yu said, "The Grand Secretary's words make sense. So I have already sent Hua Shangyue." And Mo Han frowned slightly and said, "General Hua Shanyue's loyalty to Her Highness is definitely not a problem. He is also related to General Su Qi's family by marriage. But these are meaningless." Li Yu said calmly, "Since I have given the most important task to Hua Shanyue, I believe he will be able to complete my task. Please rest assured." Shangguan Yangyu returned home from the palace and locked himself in the house. His old wife sat by the bed to serve the medicine. She asked worriedly, "Is he going to hit himself again?" Shangguan Yangyu sighed and said, "I'm afraid he will strangle himself with the white silk this time." His old wife was shocked and said, "The new emperor has ascended the throne. Her Highness is powerful. Since she values you, you should just agree. Why do you have to seek death?" Shangguan Yangyu stared at her with his triangular eyes and scolded, "What do you, an ignorant woman, know? Even if she is powerful, it depends on how long she can be powerful. If I become Her Highness's disciple, I can naturally earn a lot of money and get promoted. But what can I do when Her Majesty brings the prince back to Chang'an?" His old wife laughed when she heard this and said, "Master always talks about the law of the Tang Empire. How can you forget it now? His Majesty ascended the throne with a posthumous edict. Who dares to rebel against him? Who can rebel against him? I said you don't understand. The posthumous edict can't be faked. But Her Highness wants to see me first. Why? It means that Her Highness is also worried about chaos in Chang'an." Shangguan Yangyu said, "Under what circumstances will Chang'an be in chaos? Of course, there will be people who are dissatisfied." His old wife was even more confused. She put the medicine on the table and asked seriously, "Who can cause trouble?" Shangguan Yangyu sneered and said, "Now the ministers in the imperial court, whether they are on the side of Her Majesty or Her Highness, they all don't understand one thing. In my opinion, even His Majesty and Her Highness don't understand that the posthumous edict is not the key. Chang'an is not the key. Even those generals are not the key." His old wife asked curiously, "Then what is the key?" Shangguan Yangyu said, "The Academy's attitude is the key." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 705. At this moment, there were not many people like Shangguan Yangyu who could be as calm and clear as he could accurately find the most crucial point in this complicated world. Chao Xiaoshu's house was located on the 2nd Street of the Spring Breeze Pavilion in the eastern city. He held the child and sat beside his father, whispering to him. He dipped the tip of his chopsticks into the wine and brought it to the child's mouth. Before the child could lick it out of curiosity, Lin Zi snatched it away and glared at him. Today was old Chao's birthday. There was no big banquet at the Chao mansion. Only those close to him were invited. The brothers of the Fish Dragon Gang had taken leave from their respective yamen and came early with gifts. Thinking of the new emperor's ascension to the throne and the turbulence in Chang'an and city, the Chao mansion must be hosting a banquet because his elder brother had something to say. After everyone kowtowed to old Master Chao, they quietly waited for his instructions. Unexpectedly, Chao Xiaoshu did not say anything superfluous during the banquet. It was a picture of a peaceful family. At this moment, the steward of the Chao mansion hurried in and whispered a few words. The people at the banquet were slightly surprised, but Chow Xiaoshu did not react. He said indifferently, "What gifts did Her Highness give?" The steward took out the gift list and reported it carefully, not daring to make any mistakes. Most of the gifts that Li Yu sent to the Chow mansion were given to old Chow. There was a boxwood cane, a longevity mountain stone, a lake crab from the Great Lake, 9-river double distilled rice from Hebei County, cosmetics, and silk from Qinjinji Cosmetic Store from Madame Chow, and the rest were toys for the child. Hearing the steward's voice, Chow Xiaoshu raised his eyebrows. He did not expect Her Highness to give such simple gifts. After a moment of silence, he said, "Continue eating and drinking." So the brothers continued eating and drinking. After the banquet, old Chow went to the back garden to watch the opera. Madame Chow Xiaoshu took the child to rest. All the stewards and servants were asked to leave the flower hall. Only the brothers of the fish dragon gang were left. Chow Xiaoshu gently swirled the teacup in his hand and said, "You guys are no longer the Jianghu men you used to be. You have to keep a low profile, especially Chin 7. You don't have to worry about the bodyguard's schedule these days. Even if Su Chongshan suspects you, you don't have to worry about it. Chi 4, tell the brothers in the gang to keep quiet." He hadn't been in charge of the affairs of the fish dragons for a long time, but his words were still like an imperial edict to the fish dragons. On the surface, Chang Siwei and the others had already left the fish dragons and were working in the imperial court, but they would never object to his arrangements. They wouldn't even ask about it. The only person who would ask was Chun Chi, because he was the brains of the fish dragons. What about fifth brother's side? Chin 7 looked at the silent, middle-aged man sitting on the right side and said, "Your Highness's response is very appropriate. We can only accept it. But fifth brother is now in charge of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. The palace certainly can't let him continue to be silent. We need him to give a clear attitude." Chow Xiaoshu put down his teacup and said, "Many of our brothers are now serving in the imperial court. Since we are officials, of course we have to share the burden of the imperial court. According to the old law of the Tang Empire, we should do what we have to do." There was silence in the flower hall. Although everyone admitted that what Chow Xiaoshu said was right, it was not the past. There were many things that they still didn't understand. Chin 7 looked at his brothers and frowned slightly. He said, "I understand what everyone is worried about, but I think there is no need to worry. There can't be a problem with the edict because it can be too easily exposed. When His Majesty passed away, there were at least tens of thousands of people in Helan City who could testify." Lu Wu remained silent. He was now the highest official and the most important position. Only now did he look at Chow Xiaoshu and asked with a serious expression, "Big brother, did His Majesty tell you who the throne would be passed on to?" Chow Xiaoshu shook his head. He thought of the real big brother of the fish dragons and his former friend. Now that he couldn't see him anymore, he couldn't help but feel tired. During this time, "Don't do anything," he said. Chi 4 had a headache and asked, "Are we just going to wait like this?" Chow Xiaoshu said, "What we have to do is wait." "Wait for what?" "Wait for Her Majesty and Master Huang Yang to return to Chang'an. What if they don't come back? That means there is a problem." The horses' hooves were flying, and the soaked turf was kicked up into pieces. More than 10 Tang cavalrymen rode into the northern military camp. Both the cavalrymen and the horses looked very tired. Their bodies were covered with rainwater and mud, and they looked very embarrassed. After checking the documents, the captain of the northern military camp welcomed the cavalrymen into the camp as fast as he could. Then he summoned the soldiers to prepare hot water and food for the guests. The leader of the Tang cavalrymen said, "I want to see the general. We can talk about other things later." The captain was shocked. He thought that in such a short time, they must be very tired and painful to come to the northern military camp from the Gushan Commandery. They didn't even rest and wanted to see the general. What had happened? The young general from the Gushan Commandery was Hua Shanyue. This man had a strong family background and the full support of the princess. At a young age, he became a military supervisor of the 3 states. The troops under his command were stationed in the Gushan Commandery. Both his status and strength were not to be underestimated. He proposed to see the general as soon as possible, and the northern military camp couldn't find any reason to refuse. In the general's mansion, General Su Chi looked at the gloomy sky outside the window and kept silent for a long time. Then he turned around and looked at Hua Shangyue, saying, "You left before the rain stopped?" Hua Shangyue replied respectfully, "Yes, uncle." Su Chi said, "Young people are always so impatient. You should know that war is a big deal. You must be careful. As the military supervisor of the 3 states, you left the camp alone, which is against the military rules. If you had an accident on the road, how would you explain it to the imperial court? Not to mention how sad your parents would be?" Hua Shangyue suppressed his exhaustion and said, "It was urgent, so I came in a hurry." General Su Chi had always been low-key and calm. Even when he heard the words urgent, his expression didn't change. After another long silence, he said slowly, "Do you know that I didn't want to see you?" Hua Shangyue knew that the general had already guessed his intention. He smiled and said, "But you chose to see me in the end, which means you are willing to listen to what I have to say." Su Chi said, "I know what you are about to say is what Her Highness or His Majesty wants to say to me, but I still suggest that you don't say it." Hua Shangyue was slightly startled and asked why. Su Chi said, "Because it would be disrespectful, and I don't want to tie you up myself." Hua Shangyue said, "If you still think it's disrespectful after listening to what I have to say, I won't complain even if you cut off my head, let alone tie me up." Su Chi quietly looked into his eyes and said, "The provisions that the northern military camp sent to Healan City left the city the moment the rain stopped. Do you think what you have to say is still meaningful?" Hua Shangyue said sincerely, "The general has misunderstood His Majesty and Her Highness. No one has ever thought of cutting off the food supply of Healan City, and no one would be shameless enough to play tricks on the Tang soldiers. His Highness's request to the general is actually very simple. He just hopes that you can slow down your subsequent actions." Su Chi slowly raised his eyebrows and asked in a cold voice, "Why slow down?" Hua Shangyue did not flinch and said, "Uncle, you have always been known for your calmness. That's why the former emperor trusted you with the northern military camp. Now that the new emperor has ascended the throne, Chong, and is not peaceful, the later Her Majesty returns to Chong, and the more stable the Tang Empire will be. If so, why can't you slow down?" Su Chi said in a low voice, "His Majesty is still in Healan City. Do you want me to ignore him?" Hua Shangyue said, "His Majesty will return to Chong in one day, but Chong'an can't afford a turmoil." What a naive statement. Su Chi said expressionlessly, "If that's all, it will be hard for Her Highness to convince me. On the contrary, I will start to doubt Her Highness' intention." Hua Shangyue said, "The edict was announced in front of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court. If there was a problem, I believe that someone in Chong and would have secretly informed you. But until now, no one, including the Empress's party, has secretly informed you. So your suspicion is meaningless." There was a sudden commotion in front of the general's mansion. Hua Shangyue said, "The military situation is urgent. Uncle, deal with it first. We will continue to talk about this later." After a while, Su Chi finished dealing with the military situation and returned to the room. He looked at Hua Shangyue, who was standing by the bookshelf reading a book, but was actually lost in thought. He said, "There is some movement in the Golden Tribe Royal Court." Hua Shangyue did not expect the general to inform him of the urgent military situation. He frowned and said, "I rushed here from the Gushin Commandery and changed horses 4 times on the way. I know better than anyone how dangerous the road is after the rain. The wilderness must be even more difficult. The carriages can barely pass through, but how can a large number of cavalries move? The grassland cavalries are relatively light and have an advantage over the Tang cavalry in this kind of weather. In this case, Uncle, you should be more cautious. All in all, you just want to persuade me to move slower to help Healan City." General Su Chi stared into his eyes and said, "Don't use the possibility of an ambush from the Golden Tribe Royal Court to influence my judgment, because my cavalries will never be ambushed. Her Highness is a smart man. She knows that I will only listen to His Majesty and act according to the law of the Tang Empire. If you want to persuade me, you must have other means." Hua Shangyue took out a few files tightly wrapped in oilcloth and gently put them on the table. "According to Her Highness's original intention, It would be best if you could persuade me without these files. Because once these files are spread, it will be a great stain to the reputation of the Tang Empire and the former emperor. Su Qi's expression became serious when he heard his serious words. He walked to the desk and slowly opened the files. As he read, his eyes became colder and colder. The Tang Empire is not safe. Of course, I have no Christmas Eve. There's another chapter at work. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 706. After reading the dossiers on the desk, Su Qi's first reaction was disbelief. He looked up at Hua Shangyue coldly and said, "That's ridiculous. That's despicable." Hua Shangyue was not surprised by the general's reaction. Even he, an important general sent by the princess, could not believe it when he first heard the secret. It was unbelievable that the empress of the Tang Empire was the saintess of the devil's doctrine. Just like the general, he thought it was the princess's vicious trick. I didn't believe it at first, but the evidence is conclusive. I have to believe it. He said gloomily, "We have the testimony of the nation master Li Qingshan. The most important thing is the relationship between the empress and Xiaohou. As long as we can prove this, we can prove everything else." Su Qi thought of the dossiers that the Southern Gate Temple secretly retrieved from the divine halls of West Hill. He then compared it with the old dossiers in the palace and deduced the result. His hands suddenly trembled. "Uncle, have you ever heard of the Empress getting sick or injured all these years?" When the Qingqing Hall of the palace was on fire, the Empress rushed into the fire with her personal eunuchs and nannies to save the people. It was a good story, and everyone praised her for being strong, kind, and courageous. However, who noticed that the eunuchs and nannies were all burned? Only the Empress, who rushed into fire 3 times, was not injured at all. Hua Shangyue said solemnly, "Uncle, don't forget that we Tangs are also believers of Haotian. Although the empire is open-minded and tolerant, I have never heard that the devil's doctrine is tolerant. After Mr. Ku of the Academy destroyed the devil's doctrine, the remnants of the devil's doctrine sneaked south and made such a big conspiracy. Xiaohou and the Empress were the 2 most important people in this conspiracy. Are you going to let the devil's doctrine succeed?" Su Qi's expression became extremely serious. He suddenly said, "Now the West Hill Divine Palace wants to take advantage of the death of the headmaster and His Majesty to attack the Tang Empire. At this dangerous moment, I don't care about the difference between the Orthodox and the devil. As long as the devil's doctrine can make the Tang Empire stronger, so what?" Hua Shangyue was slightly shocked. After all, he was still too young. He was not like Su Qi and the other generals who had a history of fighting against various countries and dealing with powerhouses from Haotian Taoism at night. Therefore, he could not understand why Su Qi would rather join forces with the devil's doctrine in the face of the pressure from the West Hill Divine Palace. He asked sternly, "Uncle, are you going to watch a devil from the devil's doctrine become the Empress Dowager of the Tang Empire?" Su Qi said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, you have been married to the Empress for nearly 20 years. You must have known that she came from the devil's doctrine. Since Your Majesty has no objection, I have no objection either." Hua Shangyue suddenly felt exhausted. He did not expect that the dossier he brought out on behalf of Her Highness would not produce the results he had expected. He said in confusion, "Even if her son could rule the Tang Empire?" Su Qi was silent. Hua Shangyue suddenly thought of the words that Her Highness emphasized in the secret letter. He hurried to the desk and said angrily, "Even if His Majesty died young because he was poisoned by the Empress?" Su Qi suddenly raised his head. Hua Shangyue stared into his eyes and said, "Everything will be proved in the future. What Her Highness asked you to do is just a little slower. Whether the Tang Empire can last for thousands of years depends on your decision." In the Chang, an imperial palace, the current Tang Emperor, Li Huiyuan, looked at the gloomy sky, but his expression was not gloomy. He said with a smile, "My royal sister said that the rumors are not important. Those rebels' doubts about the edict are not important. It doesn't matter who supports me. What matters is the military power and the stability of Chang'an." He Mingshi held the yellow oiled paper umbrella and stood quietly beside him. After a moment of silence, he said, "Her Highness has been familiar with political affairs for many years. Her views on these matters are naturally worth relying on." Being worth relying on in one aspect did not mean being worth relying on in all aspects. If this sentence was further developed, if one had to rely on others for everything, then what was the use of one? Li Huiyuan was a very smart man. He understood what he Mingqi meant. His expression quickly became gloomy, and he said coldly, "Don't try to sow discord between me and my royal sister. For the sake of your recent contributions, I will pretend that I didn't hear it today. But if there's a next time, you know what will happen." He Mingqi slightly frowned and said, "I understand. My royal sister sent Xian Zhilong to Tuyang City the year before last. Now the northeast border military belongs to me. Xu Cheng's foundation is shallow, and the Tang Empire's West Army is weak. If he is smart, he will not speak before the situation is clear." Li Huiyuan indifferently said, "According to the time, Hua Shanyue should be talking with Su Qi now. With that matter, the northern military camp will no longer support that woman." He Mingqi was very clear about what matter His Majesty was talking about. In fact, it was he who told Li Yu and her brother about the Empress's secret background. Now the only problem is Su Shi, who is retiring in the south. Li Huiyuan frowned and said. He Mingqi said, "This is also the most difficult problem." Li Huiyuan expressed his agreement with silence. He Mingqi said, "Su Shi is the Defender General of the state. He is very experienced and powerful. Even the Yulin Royal Guards have to listen to his orders. Besides, he is very prestigious and no one can touch him." Li Huiyuan looked at the gloomy sky above the palace and said with a gloomy face, "This old guy has been living for many years, but he still refuses to retire. If he is in the court, does the Tang Empire's army belong to me or him?" After a moment of silence, He Mingqi said, "Your Majesty, how do you want to persuade General Su Shi? I am willing to share your worries." Li Huiyuan said sarcastically, "Uncle Qingshan had to avoid Su Shi. Even if I make you the nation master now, what can you do to him? If the Southern Gate Temple had this ability, would it still be under the West Hill Divine Palace?" He Mingqi said, "Your Majesty is right. But I believe that under your Majesty's rule, the Southern Gate Temple will flourish in the future. It will surpass the West Hill Divine Palace and not bring shame to the Tang Empire. That is in the future, after all." Li Huiyuan squinted and suddenly said, "After all, you and the West Hill Divine Palace are of the same lineage. You have a close relationship. Do you have any way to contact the West Hill Divine Palace?" He Mingqi was slightly surprised and said seriously, "Your Majesty, I know that I am asking a tiger for its skin. I know what the old fakes of the West Hill Divine Palace want, and I can give them. I also know what I want, but I can't afford to lose." Li Huiyuan waved his hand and said gloomily, "In order to resist foreign aggression, we must first stabilize the interior. When the Tang Empire was founded, Emperor Taizu was forced to sign an agreement with the desolate men. He was humiliated, but he finally drove the desolate men out of the grassland. They were like cattle and sheep in the cold region of the far north, where they suffered for thousands of years. In the future, I will lead the army to flatten the Peach Mountain." The headmaster of the academy and the Tang Emperor passed away one after another. At that time, it seemed that the Tangs accepted this reality calmly. Because the Tangs were used to life and death, their spirit and temperament had been running wildly on the road of toughness. But in fact, the hearts of the Tangs, especially the bigwigs of the Tang Empire, were changing subtly. Even they themselves did not notice that change. They were no longer as confident and direct as when the headmaster of the academy and His Majesty were still alive. They began to rely on schemes and even began to seek external forces. For the tens of thousands of Tang soldiers in Heilin City, this influence was more reflected in their emotions. Especially after the military food supply was controlled, the atmosphere in the city became more and more gloomy. Before the rain stopped, we had already sent out 3 groups of messengers. After the rain stopped, we sent a few more groups. According to the time, it should be the day after tomorrow at the latest. Don't worry too much, Your Majesty. General Han Qing reported in a low voice. The Empress said expressionlessly, "What if the messengers are all killed?" Han Qing's face was livid. He wanted to speak, but he suppressed the urge to swear. His anger was naturally not directed at the Empress, but at some people in Chang and City. That night, when Helan City tried to send messages again, they found that the talisman array in the Imperial Palace of Chang and City had been shut down. The people in Helan City understood what had happened. Han Qing said in a low voice, "We will set off for the south tomorrow. Rest assured, Your Majesty, no one will dare to stop us." The Empress said, "No one dares to cut off the food supply of Helan City. Su Qi doesn't dare, and neither does Liu." The food team did not come, but it does not mean that there is something wrong with the northern military camp. The problem may be in the wilderness. Master Huang Yang, who had been silent, said, "I will go around the east wilderness to return to Chang'an first." The Empress said tiredly, "The headmaster has passed away, and His Majesty has left. Once there is a big movement, the whole world will move. I think the east wilderness is not peaceful now." Liu is a very smart girl. She must have thought of this. She is very clear about what is happening in the east wilderness, but she is confident that she can solve it. However, I am worried that she has underestimated the enemy. Han Qing frowned and said, "Your Majesty, do you think it is possible that Her Highness has colluded with the Golden Tribe Royal Court to cut off the food supply of Helan City?" The Empress shook her head and said, "Liu may be a little narrow-minded, but she knows that she is a Tang and would not do such a thing. I think the Golden Tribe Royal Court's strange move is most likely a trick of the West Hill Divine Palace. But I believe she will be very happy to see this." Countless grassland cavalries appeared in the wilderness at the border of the Yin territory. The wilderness was very wet after being drenched by heavy rain for many days. No matter how strong the wind howled, there was no dust flying. However, at this time, the wilderness was covered in smoke and dust, rising to the sky. It could be imagined how many cavalries there were. Long Qing touched the silver mask on his face and looked at his homeland in the south of the Yin Kingdom. In his eyes, there was no fear of homecoming, nor was there any emotion of returning from a long journey. There was no flame of hatred, only indifference. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 707. The cause of the war was that the Desolate Man had fought with the Left King's palace for the grassland. Then it snowballed until all the countries in the world were involved. No one had expected that the Left King's palace would gradually stay out of the war. They suffered the least losses in the war in the wilderness, and with the secret support of the West Hill Divine Palace, they had preserved enough strength. Tens of thousands of cavalrymen of the Left King's palace entered the Yin territory in the name of fighting against the Tang Empire. But in many people's eyes, it was just a very poor excuse. Most people thought that Prince Longqing finally wanted to take the throne of the Yin Kingdom after he completely controlled the Left King's palace. He wanted to take back what he thought belonged to him. So what if they knew? The Yin Kingdom was poor and weak under the attack of the Tang Empire. It could not deal with the fierce cavalrymen. In addition, Prince Longqing had many supporters in the Yin Kingdom. All the counties ignored the anger of the capital. In order to preserve their own strength, they did not make any serious resistance. Therefore, tens of thousands of grassland cavalrymen easily went south. They did not encounter a real battle until they approached Chengjing City. The Yin army was no match for the grassland cavalrymen. They lost many battles. In addition, with the help of Prince Longqing's family and old generals, more than 10 cities in the north of Chengjing City surrendered one after another. With the mutiny of the north camp of Chengjing City, no one could stop Prince Longqing from returning to the capital. In the deep night, countless torches were lit on the wall of the capital of the Yin Kingdom. The city walls were as bright as day. The security was extremely tight. No one knew that the south gate, which should have been closed, had been quietly opened. Dozens of soldiers kept waving their arms at the wilderness in the night. The sound of hooves gradually sounded in the night. The moon shone through the clouds, showing the dark scene of the grassland cavalrymen. It was extremely shocking. Chengjing City was conquered. The hooves of the grassland cavalrymen were wrapped in cotton. But after entering the south gate, they rode on the narrow street. There were too many cavalrymen, and the sound of hooves gradually became louder. It could not be hidden from everyone's ears. The doors of the houses on both sides of the street were tightly closed. Some bold Yin people secretly looked at the foreign cavalrymen through the cracks of the doors. They counted for a long time, but they did not see the cavalrymen leave. The people of Yin were shocked and terrified. It was not until then that they truly felt the authenticity of the rumors. It turned out that Prince Longqing had really become the master of the left tent palace. How many barbarians had entered the capital tonight? Could those rumored brutal barbarians obey the prince's military order and not burn, kill, and loot? The silver mask reflected the light from the torches, making it look like it was made of gold. Prince Longqing glanced at the palace in the distance. His face, which was not covered by the mask, showed no change of emotion. Then he took out a map and looked at the defensive measures and plans drawn on the map in silence. The grassland cavalrymen were able to march south smoothly and easily into capital Cheng because of the power of his mother's family in the Yin Kingdom and the pervasive penetration of his former subordinates into the court of the Yin Kingdom. However, the map he was looking at now was not the one sent by his former subordinates in the defense of capital Cheng. He had drawn it himself. In the spring, before he led the cavalrymen of the left tent palace to ambush the black horse carriage, he had already drawn the map and sent it back to capital Cheng. The map in his hands now was the one he had drawn later, according to his memory. Thinking of the day when they ambushed the black horse carriage but were ambushed by the desolate men, Longqing frowned slightly. If not for the loss of so many grassland cavalrymen that day, he was confident that tonight would be more perfect. However, victory was right in front of him. After solving the problem of the Yin Kingdom, he would lead the army to continue attacking the Tang Empire. Ningke's country would eventually be burned to ashes by him. What was there to be dissatisfied about? Longqing looked at capital Cheng shrouded in darkness and the complicated streets under the moonlight. He compared the plan he had drawn on the map with the corner of his mouth slightly curled up, as if he was smiling with satisfaction. However, there seemed to be a very complicated emotion on his face, as if he was waiting for someone and something to happen. In the northwest of capital Cheng, there was an inconspicuous restaurant. Around the restaurant, there were nearly 100 Tang soldiers with padaos on their backs and dozens of messengers from the Tang and Yin armies. In the restaurant, Xian Zhilong rubbed his tired eyebrows and thought about the strategy he had drawn up. After confirming that there should be no problem, he said to a Yin general, "I hope the cooperation goes well." The Yin general said respectfully, "His Highness the Crown Prince is very grateful for Her Highness' help. However, Longqing's rebellion is very powerful. His Highness asks you to take care of yourself." Longqing is ambitious and capable. He also knows how to take advantage of the situation. When he was wanted by the West Hill Divine Palace, he was still able to make a name for himself in the wilderness. Xian Zhilong said, now that he has returned to the West Hill Divine Palace and gained the support of Haotian Taoism, he is even more arrogant. However, he doesn't understand one thing. If he is invincible with the support of the Divine Hall, how can the Tang Empire survive until today? The Yin general said, if His Highness the Crown Prince could feel your confidence, he would be even happier. Xian Zhilong was the great northern general of the Tang Empire. He was supposed to stay in Tuyang City and command the northeast border military, which was famous for its violence and power. Who would have thought that he would appear in the capital of the Yin Kingdom? Since he was here, his army was naturally in the capital of the Yin Kingdom. After the war in the wilderness, the Tang Empire's army retreated in two ways. The northeast border military retreated to Tuyang City on the surface. However, no one knew that the northeast border military had secretly sneaked into the Yin territory again and set up an ambush in capital Cheng. The Yin Kingdom was so powerless against the grassland cavalry. They allowed them to go all the way to the south and watch them enter capital Cheng. It was all because of this hidden killing in the dark. This was the gift that Crown Prince Chongming prepared for his brother, who had just returned from afar. This was also the fundamental reason why Li Yu was so confident, even though she knew that the situation in the eastern wilderness had changed. Xian Zhilong walked to the railing of the restaurant and looked to the south of the city. He looked at the sky that was getting brighter and brighter. He seemed to hear the hoofbeats of the grassland cavalry. Long Qing led the army to the south and was determined to win the throne of the Yin kingdom. However, Chang and city wanted Crown Prince Chongming to succeed the throne. Not to mention the friendship between Her Royal Highness and Crown Prince Chongming, it was impossible for Long Qing to change the situation of the Yin kingdom so easily for the benefit of the Tang Empire. Xianzhilong thought about the news from Chang and the Gushan commandery. His face gradually became solemn. He did not ambush all his troops in capital Chang. Tonight, there were only more than 4,000 armored cavalries in the city, but they were already the most powerful and decisive force in Tiyang City. He did not think that the grassland cavalry, who only knew the art of archery, could fight against the invincible heavy cavalry of the Tang Empire on the flat street. However, he was still nervous. It had nothing to do with the Yin kingdom. It was only about Chang'an. The new emperor had succeeded the throne, and the undercurrents were surging in Chang'an. There were hidden murderous intents around the country. Whether it was for the stability of the court or the safety of the Tang Empire, this battle had to be fought. This was the battle to determine the new Tang Empire. They had to win, and it had to be a complete victory. There was a prince's mansion in the northeast of capital Chang. The former owner of the mansion was Prince Long Qing. Although it had been abandoned for many years, the luxurious and exquisite remnants of the past could still be seen. Everyone knew the purpose of Prince Long Qing leading the army to the south. The safest palace had now become the most dangerous place, so Crown Prince Chongming had left the palace early. He came to the prince's mansion with his loyal subordinates and several generals. Then, he locked himself in the prince's study and stayed alone for a long time. Looking at the dusty books on the bookshelf, Crown Prince Chongming suddenly remembered the scene of him holding Long Qing and learning to read many years ago. A nostalgic smile appeared on his face. Then, he gradually calmed down and walked out of the study. The intelligence office is still calculating the number of barbarian cavalries entering the city. It has not been completely calculated, but compared with the number when they enter the city, there is a big gap. The barbarian cavalries have now arrived at the musical house and are not far from the palace. An official reported to him. Crown Prince Chongming said, "Is there any news from the restaurant?" A subordinate reported, "The Tang cavalry has not moved. They are waiting for the fireworks. It seems that the sacrifice at the beginning is inevitable." Crown Prince Chongming said, "Then light the fireworks and inform all the people in the city." Soon after he finished his words, a gorgeous firework rushed into the night sky toward the government office across the street. The firework flew so high that it seemed to touch the moon. It was believed that all the people in the city could see it. Crown Prince Chongming looked at the firework gradually disappearing in the moonlight. After a long silence, he suddenly said, "The black armored cavalry of the Tang Empire is said to be invincible in the world. They have never been defeated?" The heavy armored cavalry was the most terrifying combat force in the field. Even the powerful cultivators could not resist it. However, there was no perfect thing in the world. The heavy armored cavalry also had its weaknesses. The armor was too heavy for long-distance attacks. Moreover, it was affected by the armor. In narrow areas, it was not as flexible as the light cavalry. This was the most obvious weakness of the heavy armored cavalry. The biggest problem was that the maintenance cost of the heavy armored cavalry was very high. A heavy armored cavalry needed a large number of retinue and auxiliary soldiers. The consumption was extremely terrifying. In today's world, except for the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace, no other country could organize a heavy armored cavalry. However, there was a reason why the heavy armored cavalry was called the important weapon on the battlefield. This kind of cavalry was given the mission to charge and charge from the day it was born. It was the nightmare of countless enemies. The streets of the capital of Yin Kingdom were long and straight. Logically speaking, it was not suitable for the heavy armored cavalry to charge. However, with the cooperation of the Yin Kingdom's local army and the grassland light cavalry that followed Longqing to the south, this kind of environment would allow the Tang heavy armored cavalry to fully exert their charging power. Whether from the perspective of strategy or the specific tactical arrangement, Xian Zhilong was worthy of the title of a wise general. If there were no accidents, Prince Longqing and his tens of thousands of grassland light cavalry would become a small record in the history books and a joke on the streets after tonight. The fireworks lit up the night sky. The Tang soldiers near the restaurant carried long padeos on their backs and looked up at the sky with a calm and confident expression. Xian Zhilong looked at the firework and ordered softly, "Attack." Longqing also saw the firework. The corners of his lips curled up even higher, showing that he was very satisfied. Xian Zhilong is the most intelligent one among the 4 royal generals of the Tang Kingdom. He is used to calculating people's hearts with interests. However, he has forgotten the most important point. There are many kinds of interests, and the biggest interests are the so-called righteousness. Longqing looked at the generals of the palace and said, "The curtain has opened. This is the world's first war against the Tang Kingdom. Hao Ian is watching us, so let's kill all these proud Tangs." After saying this, he lightly lifted the reins of his horse and rode into a quiet alley with more than 10 fallen generals. He was going to do the most important thing, and that was to cut off the Tang's path of retreat. The Yin Kingdom's palace looked particularly beautiful at night. Under the eaves were autumn trees all over the mountains. Under the moonlight, it was cold and beautiful. It was like a fairyland. Looking at the beautiful scenery in the distance and imagining the pleasure of rushing into the palace and kidnapping the palace maids, the grassland cavalry's eyes turned red. When the general gave the order, they could only hear the loud whistles. The cavalrymen unsheathed their cutlasses and brandished them. Then, they clamped their horses' bellies and charged forward. Hundreds of grassland cavalrymen rushed through the long street and then fell down one by one. More than 10 horse tripping ropes tore off many horses' legs like poisonous snakes. The Yin army, who had been lying in ambush on both sides of the long street for a long time, began to shoot arrows. The arrows fell like rain. In a moment, the cavalrymen died, screaming in pain. The battle did not end after it started. Almost at the same time, the entire Qingjing city was filled with the sounds of fighting and screams. Blood stained the night sky, and broken limbs flew in the moonlight. It should be fine. There was not a single torch on the straight road to the side of the Yin Kingdom's imperial palace, and no sound could be heard. The moonlight that passed through the trees fell on the heavy armor of the Tang cavalry, making the armor of both men and horses shine coldly. This was the Tang Northeast Border Military's black armored cavalry vanguard camp. The general of the vanguard camp pulled down his helmet and slowly pulled out his straight saber. He pointed at the night sky and the long street and shouted in a deep voice, "Crush them!" The hooves of the horses gradually moved. The heavy armored cavalrymen stepped on the hard ground and began to charge again, just like in the past. The earth began to shake. The whole city began to shake. All the details of this fatal ambush against Longqing and the grassland cavalrymen were carefully planned. The cooperation between the Tang army and the Yin army had been practiced many times, so they were very skilled. When the Tang armored cavalrymen rushed out of the straight road beside the imperial palace, the Yin army, who were struggling in the archway behind the straight road, made way for them at the fastest speed. The grassland cavalrymen of the Left King's palace were waving their machetes and looking for the Yin army, who were still alive. Suddenly, they felt the earth shaking and were shocked to find that their horses became inexplicably uneasy. They looked to the north subconsciously and then saw the Tang cavalrymen and horses in black. The Tangs, retreat. The Tang armored cavalrymen did not care about the grassland cavalrymen's exclamation. They maintained the perfect speed and continued to charge on the long street with terrifying momentum. Wherever they passed, the grass gradually fell. However, at this moment, something unexpected happened. There was a bug in the previous part. When the Tang emperor wrote the edict, only Li Qingshan was beside him. Huangyang was not there. I want to explain it here. By the way, I was really saving the manuscript. Now I have saved a chapter. Damn it, I will update that chapter immediately. There will be 2 chapters today. I will try to save some manuscripts tonight. How painful. To be continued. If you like this work, please come come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 708. The decorated archway at the end of the street collapsed. Then, several neighboring commercial buildings collapsed one after another. Smoke and dust rose. Countless bricks and pieces of wood piled up into a small hill, blocking the way out of the long street. The grassland cavalry general's anxious and frightened expression became ferocious. He held his machete and looked at the charging Tang army, no longer retreating. The grassland cavalry did not retreat either. Suddenly, more tripping ropes appeared on the chaotic street, entangling the hooves of the Tang heavy cavalry. The Tang cavalry fell heavily on the ground. Their heavy armors collided with the hard ground, making a dull sound. Blood flowed out of their gray armors. More Yin soldiers appeared in the buildings on both sides of the street and started shooting arrows at the Tang army. The arrows suddenly rained down violently. Several arrows pierced through the edges of the Tang cavalry's armors at the same time. From time to time, buildings collapsed on the street, becoming insurmountable obstacles for the heavy cavalry. Some cavalrymen and their mounts were buried by the collapsed buildings and could not stand up again. This was indeed an ambush. But it was not an ambush by the Tang army and the Yin army against the grassland cavalry. It was an ambush by the Yin army and the grassland cavalry against the Tang army. The Tang black armored heavy cavalry was invincible in the world. Could they still be invincible today? The Tang general looked at his subordinates, who kept falling down. His voice was as cold as the snow on Min Mountain. He looked at the Yin army and the grassland cavalry on both sides of the street and said, "Kill them all, and we can get out." Ambushes took place everywhere in the city. The Tang army suffered a heavy blow, but they still charged forward fearlessly. With the anger of betrayal and the grief of the sacrifice of their comrades, they waved the padeos in their hands and stabbed the spears in their hands, continuing to charge forward. The Northeast Border Army Vanguard Battalion was facing the most difficult situation on the long street. They had the largest number of enemies, the grassland barbarians with terrible archery skills. It seemed that they could not kill them all, but there were no enemies in the world that could not be killed. All the Tang cavalrymen had a belief. As the general said, as long as they killed all the enemies in front of them, they would naturally be able to get out. Shrill cries and muffled collisions rang out on the long street. The grassland cavalry and the Yin army, which were like tidewater, were frightened by the Tang cavalry. A gap appeared on the wide area where the 2 streets intersected. The commander of the Vanguard Battalion transferred the padao that had already been chipped to his left hand and said in a deep voice, "Continue the charge." As long as they rushed out of the long street, the Yin kingdom would no longer be able to organize an effective blockade. Then, he could follow the great general's plan and lead his men back through the east gate. He did not turn his head. He knew that out of the 1,000 heavy cavalry under his command, only less than half remained. This was the worst defeat the great Tang black armored cavalry had suffered in the last few decades. But he was not sad, because he believed that every cavalry under his command had killed at least several times their number of enemies before they died. That was enough. This way, he could puff out his chest and go back proudly. The general of the Vanguard Battalion lifted the reins of his horse and galloped forward. With a slash of his saber, a grassland cavalryman was cut into 2 halves from the body to the blade. Then, he passed through the rain of blood and rushed forward. Suddenly, his injured right hand, which was holding the horse zombie, stiffened. The horse, which was already a little tired, stopped moving. The hundreds of Tang cavalrymen behind him also quieted down. The grassland cavalrymen had long been scared out of their wits. Their formation was in a mess and scattered on the side. However, the gap that seemed to allow the Tang cavalrymen to leave had been filled up by the cavalry. Those cavalrymen also wore black armor. But compared to the Tang cavalrymen, their armors were painted with complicated golden talisman lines, which were more eye-catching and bright in the night. In the world, There were only two kinds of cavalrymen qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as the Tang cavalrymen. One was the elite cavalryman directly under the Golden Palace. The other was the papal cavalryman of the West Hill Divine Palace. It was even said that the papal cavalrymen of the Divine Hall could not defeat 1,000 of them. For countless years, the number of papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace was strictly limited to 1,000, probably to avoid disturbing the secular imperial power. But now it seemed that this was obviously a lie made by the West Hill Divine Palace, because there were more than 1,000 papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace on the opposite side of the long street. The general of the Vanguard Battalion squinted and lifted his helmet to look across the long street. He wiped the blood off his face and was silent for a long time. Then he suddenly laughed. "I have wanted to prove one thing in my life. You West Hill cavalrymen are only qualified to carry my boots. I did not expect that I would have such an opportunity before I die." The general of the Vanguard Battalion stopped laughing and slowly raised his padao. He said, "Who is willing to fight with me?" The hundreds of Tang cavalrymen behind him answered in unison. They were not afraid, but were ready to fight to the death. In the restaurant, Xian Zhilong looked at the city in the night. He held the cold railing tightly, his knuckles turning white. He squinted and was silent for a moment. Then he loosened his right hand and tapped on the railing. When he tapped on his ring finger, he stopped. Then he issued 3 military orders. Vanguard Battalion, disperse. The order forbidding entry is abolished. Kill it will. We must hold on until dawn. All battalions are to break through the East City Gate in an hour. The route and tactics are the opposite of the pre-war arrangement. Imperial Guard Battalion, follow me to the prince's mansion. The officers and messengers in the restaurant were stunned for a moment. Then they began to act separately. With the quality of the Tang army, there should not be such a moment of stagnation. But even they needed time to digest the content of Xian Zhilong's 3 military orders. Dispersing the Vanguard Battalion was tantamount to sending them to their deaths to buy time for the other cavalry battalions to escape. "We have lost." Xian Zhilong looked at the crowd and said, "Then we must lose beautifully. If there are any of you alive after this battle, remember to bring a message to Her Highness. We lost because of trust. Now the whole world is against the Tang Empire. Then the Tang Empire can only trust the Tang Empire." After saying this, he glanced at the Yin general. The Yin general was one of the most important generals of the Yin kingdom. Otherwise, he would not be qualified to be here. The Yin general smiled sadly and pulled out his knife to commit suicide. Xian Zhilong walked out of the restaurant. Dozens of Tang soldiers with padaos walked out of the darkness. They looked around vigilantly. They knew that since they were ambushed, the general must be the first person the enemy wanted to kill. But Xian Zhilong did not want to wait to be killed by the Yans. His 3rd military order had already made his choice clear. He would lead the Imperial Guard Battalion to the prince's mansion in the east. He was going to see-crown Prince Chongming, or kill him, or be killed by him. There are still 3 days until the monthly votes are doubled. Maybe we will win, or maybe we will lose. That's all. I will try my best. Invincible? See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 709. Li Yu trusted crown Prince Chongming, who had known her for many years. That was why she betrayed and killed in the capital of the Yin kingdom tonight. Xian Zhilong trusted Li Yu, but he was an intelligent imperial general. He did not forget to make his own arrangements while cooperating with the Yin kingdom according to Li Yu's request. To be on the safe side, he arranged an escape route for the thousands of Tang armored cavalrymen who had sneaked into the capital. That escape route was the most inconspicuous East City Gate. The military order was passed from the restaurant to all parts of the capital through fireworks and death knights. The Tang cavalrymen fought bravely towards the East City Gate and gradually gathered. If the Tang cavalrymen were allowed to gather and rush out of the gate into the wilderness, then the death zone would become a survival zone. It would be very difficult to wipe out the thousands of cavalrymen. Chongming and Longqing had such a good opportunity after years of forbearance and disguise. How could they allow such a thing to happen? So they closed the city gates at the beginning of the battle. The Yin people were very cruel. The city gates were not closed like usual. Instead, they were sealed with heavy iron gates and 10,000-kilogram stones. In this way, when they reopened the gates after the battle, they would have to use a lot of labor. Even if the Tang army reached the city gates, they would not be able to get out. The only variable was the East City Gate. This was the survival route that Xian Zhilong had left for the Tang army. Naturally, he had made arrangements here. Several military powerhouses with more than 100 Tang soldiers had already taken control of this place. The heavy iron gate was suspended in midair, and the 10,000-kilogram stone was only a few feet away from rolling down the tunnel. The ground outside the city gate was covered in blood, and the corpses of the Yin Kingdom's soldiers were lying in a pool of blood. It could be imagined how dangerous and bloody the previous battle was. The Tang army stood on the waist of the city wall and looked at the city in the night. They listened to the shouting and the sound of buildings collapsing in the distance. Their faces were full of anxiety. At this time, the Yin army in the city was attracted by the powerful Tang cavalrymen. Even if someone noticed the movement at the East City Gate, there was no way to mobilize a strong enough army. But they could not hold on forever. They only hoped to see their comrades as soon as possible. The sound of hooves gradually rose. The faces of the Tang army were filled with surprise. However, moments later, the surprise on their faces turned into anger and disappointment. Many people wearing black priest robes arrived at the East City Gate. The person at the front was wearing a silver mask. It was Prince Longqing and his fallen commander. Black peach blossoms bloomed. An expert of the Tang army punched the black peach blossom with a thunderous punch. The black peach blossom petals trembled slightly. Another expert of the Tang army jumped down from the city wall. Several powerhouses of the Tang army attacked Longqing together with tacit understanding. In their eyes, the fallen commanders did not exist at all. There was only the silver-masked man. The aura of heaven and earth suddenly became turbulent and uneasy. The thick skin of the city wall peeled off. The ancient bricks began to tremble. After an unknown amount of time, there was a loud bang. The 10,000 caddy stone fell. The iron gate fell heavily to the ground. We've lost the East Gate. One of the subordinates looked at the warning firework rising from the east, and his face turned ashen. Xian Zhilong stopped, but the expression on his face remained calm. After a moment of silence, he said, "Since we can't leave, then we won't. Tell all the battalion generals that the Vanguard Battalion is now facing the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. Tell them that if they don't want to miss such an interesting thing, then they should all go to the archway of the West Hill Divine Palace. Then they can go to the Imperial Palace. Tell them that the goal of the war has changed. Now we only have two goals. The first is to kill all the cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. The second is to burn down the Imperial Palace of the Yin Kingdom and kill the Yin Emperor." After a moment of silence, Xian Zhilong said, "If we can achieve these two goals, then even if we die here like idiots, we will have an explanation to the elders of the Tang Empire." Throughout the night, the whole of Chengjing was shaking. The iron gate at the East City Gate was also shaking. From time to time, there was a dull sound of impact and the sound of punches, kicks, and knives. After a long time, there was no more sound. The sky was getting brighter. Chengjing became much quieter during the day. Only the sound of chasing and fighting could be heard occasionally. The government began to organize civilian workers and government runners to clean up the streets. At noon, the iron gate at the East City Gate was finally pulled up. There were dead bodies everywhere in front of the iron gate. Some of them were from the Tang Empire, some were from the Yin Empire, and some were dressed in strange black robes. As the iron gate was pulled up, the blood that had not completely coagulated flowed out like a stream. Looking at this tragic scene, the civilian workers and soldiers of the Yin Empire were extremely pale, especially when they saw the deep palm prints and knife marks on the iron gate. They were even more frightened. They secretly wondered if the Tang army was human. How could they have such a terrible determination in such a desperate situation? The Yin Empire and the Tang Empire had been enemies for many years, but they had never won on the battlefield. They had always been humiliated and bullied. The battle last night was undoubtedly the biggest victory that the Yin Empire had ever won against the Tang Empire. It was worthy of being written in a book to express the grievances of the Yin people over the years. In the face of such a victory, the whole country should be celebrating. However, there was no such atmosphere in Chengjing at this time. The people who won were not happy at all. People were cleaning up the broken bodies on the street in fear and disgust. They used brooms to sweep the scattered organs. No one knew how many Yin soldiers and grassland cavalrymen had been trampled into meat paste by the Tang cavalry. There were still sporadic fights in some streets, but no Yin people dared to go near. Only the Yin soldiers and grassland barbarians held weapons and searched around in fear. In the corner of the street, a young Yin soldier found a Tang cavalryman who was not completely dead. He kept slashing with his knife, looking extremely numb and mechanical. The Tang soldier was long dead. At this time, he had been slashed so many times, but he did not feel much pain. He looked up indifferently at the young Yin soldier, his eyes full of sarcasm. He spat at the Yin soldier. There were countless holes in his chest, and he was about to stop breathing. The spittle was bloody and could not reach far. It fell on his own chest, and then he died. The young Yin soldier was startled. He threw away his knife and ran away crying. In the northeast of Chengjing, outside the old prince's mansion of Prince Longqing, hundreds of Yin soldiers and grassland cavalrymen surrounded the place. In front of the prince's mansion, there were many corpses of Tang soldiers. Most of them were covered with arrows. A few Tang soldiers had attacked the stone steps, but they could not go any further. There were also a few Tang soldiers standing on the street, surrounded by the heavy siege. They protected Xian Zhilong in the middle. Xian Zhilong was covered in blood, but his face was expressionless. After a while, a few more Tang soldiers fell to the ground. Now only Xian Zhilong and the general of the Imperial Guard camp were left. The general looked around at the approaching enemies and suddenly asked, "General, if we die now, will it be a disgrace to the Tang Empire?" Xian Zhilong said, "All the fault is His Highness and me. It has nothing to do with you." The general said, "That's good. Please send me off, General." Xian Zhilong laughed and coughed. He said, "Not you." The general said seriously, "According to the military law of the Tang Empire, I must die before you." Xian Zhilong stopped smiling and drew out his sword. He said, "You know my swordsmanship is terrible. Please forgive me." The general said, "General, we have been disrespectful since you came to Tiang City. Please forgive us." Xian Zhilong nodded and chopped down with his sword. Then he looked in the direction of the palace of the Yin kingdom with a look of regret. The front door of the prince's mansion opened, and Crown Prince Chongming walked out. The army gradually separated, and Prince Longqing walked in from the periphery. The two looked at Xian Zhilong, who was standing with his sword. They had successfully schemed against the Tang general, who was known for his intelligence, and finally won. But they did not feel much joy. Looking at the weak general, Longqing even felt a little cold. In the battle last night, he had suffered a serious knife wound on his shoulder. The power of the Tang Empire's cavalry was too terrifying. The violent and unreasonable counterattack at the end had almost rudely destroyed his whole plan. At the end of the battle, when the Tang army had lost, Xian Zhilong organized a beheading in a very short time. If he had not been protected by two martial arts powerhouses from the West Hill Divine Palace, he would have died in that assassination. The situation would have changed. Xian Zhilong looked at Crown Prince Chongming and asked, "How does it feel to be a traitor?" Crown Prince Chongming was still graceful and said, "Everyone has the right to say that I'm a traitor, but you Tangs don't. For countless years, the Yin kingdom has been bullied. During the reign of Marquis Xia, the Yin kingdom suffered even more. I don't know how many innocent people died under the Tang cavalry. If I join hands with you, it will be a real betrayal." Longqing walked to Crown Prince Chongming and asked Xian Zhilong, "The Tang army's bravery is indeed extraordinary. What I don't understand now is why you haven't killed yourself." Xian Zhilong said, "I just want to ask a few questions." "What questions?" "The same question as before. I don't understand why Crown Prince Chongming would join hands with you to set up such a trap. I believe Her Highness in Chong, and will also not understand when she knows the truth. You Tangs always like to flaunt the great harmony of the world. You think that you can really ignore the country after accepting foreigners to be officials in the court and teach in the academy. In fact, you have such a mentality because you have been strong enough in the past years. You have no idea what other people are thinking. Crown Prince Chongming said, I have been a hostage in Chong and for so many years. I have a good relationship with Sister Liu, and some Tang officials even advised me to stay in Chong and to be an official. But have you ever thought about what the years in Chong mean to me? Have you ever thought that I am a yin, after all? Xian Zhilong said after a moment of silence. The reason why I believe in Her Highness' plan and am willing to trust you is that I know very well that you and Prince Longqing can't coexist. Whether it is for the throne of the Yin Kingdom or for survival, you should want him to die. Crown Prince Chongming said, everything is just an illusion. We two brothers actually had a good relationship when we were young. Later on, when our mothers' families confronted each other, it had nothing to do with us. Because we knew very well what each other wanted since we were young. I want the throne of the secular world, but he has his eyes on the secular world. And the only thing that we brothers really want is to destroy your Tang Empire. Xian Zhilong shook his head and said, desire is endless. Even if you have your eyes on the secular world, you are not willing to abandon the prosperity of the secular world. Otherwise, why would the West Hill Divine Palace do such things in the human world? And there is already a blood feud between your clansmen, which cannot be forgiven. One day, you will regret today's decision. Longqing had been silent until now, and then he said, you are indeed a wise general of the Tang Empire, known for your wisdom. Even when you are about to die, you still do not forget to leave a nail in our hearts. Crown Prince Chongming said, even if there is a day when we fight, I will not regret today's choice. You Tangs have never been defeated for thousands of years. You don't know how crazy that feeling of humiliation is. For hundreds of years, you have humiliated us, and today, it will become the power to destroy you. For this purpose, whether it is me or Longqing, we are willing to give everything. Destroy the Tang Empire? Xian Zhilong laughed and looked at the Yin brothers. He said with emotion, after all, you have overestimated yourselves. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace are all dead. I believe that the strength that you have accumulated for many years has all been used in this battle. In the end, you can only die with us. Crown Prince Chongming's face became a little gloomy. He knew that Xian Zhilong's judgment was right. In order to annihilate all the cavalrymen of the northeast border military of the Tang Empire, the Yin Kingdom had paid a heavy price. After the battle last night, although the thousands of terrifying black armored cavalrymen of the Tang Empire could no longer appear in the world, the casualties of the Yin army and the grassland cavalrymen were almost 10 times that of the enemy. What was more shocking was that the more than 1,000 papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace, which he and Longqing relied on to win the battle, were all annihilated by the exhausted Tang cavalrymen in the final battle. Could such a painful victory really be called a victory? I know what you want to say. You want to say that there are still many soldiers of the northeast border military who have not entered capital Chong. But I regret to tell you that I did not bring all the grassland cavalrymen into capital Chong. Now, those grassland cavalrymen are working together with the allied forces of the Song and Shun kingdoms to kill your troops. And by now, you should have judged that the number of papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace is definitely more than 1,000. Yes, the total number of papal cavalrymen has exceeded 10,000 as early as 5 years ago. Now that the people of the Yin Kingdom are united and we have such strong support, why can't we destroy the Tang Empire? Prince Longqing looked at Xian Zhilong and said, for thousands of years, you Tangs have bullied the weak and enjoyed all the glory because of your strong army. Have you ever thought that there would be a day when you would be defeated so badly? Everyone will die one day. No matter how strong an empire is, it will be destroyed one day. I don't know when the history of the Tang Empire will end, but it will not be now, and it will not be ended by the Yin Kingdom. Xian Zhilong said, "The world calls the Tang army an invincible army. In fact, this is wrong. The Tang army will also suffer defeats. Even when we fight with the Yin kingdom, we will lose sometimes. We are never as invincible as the rumors say, but we will always win in the end." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 710. There were many people like Xian Zhilong who believed that the Tang Empire would win in the end. Some had died in the battle last night. Some were still fighting. One of the Tang generals chopped off the neck of a Yin guard. He was the commander of the Northeast Border Military Vanguard Battalion of the Tang Empire. His name was Sheng Yongli. His name was very auspicious, especially for a general. No matter if it was the former emperor or great General Xiaohou, they all liked to see his name on the battle reports. Thus, his name appeared more and more frequently on the battle reports. He firmly controlled the strongest heavy cavalry in the Northeast Border Army. Of course, even if he was the illegitimate son of the emperor, he could not have risen to such an important position in the army with just his name. Sheng Yongli was good at fighting and winning. That was the key. He had killed many enemies on the battlefield in his life, including the Yin Kingdom, the Song Kingdom, the barbarians of the Left King's Palace, and the Desolate Man returning to the south. But thinking about it now, he realized that the number of enemies he had killed last night was not even as many as he had killed last night. The archway collapsed, and the Vanguard Battalion was ambushed. He rushed forward with his spear and changed his blade when his spear was broken. His right arm was hammered and his shoulder armor was deformed, so he changed his padao to his left hand. The padao had collided with the bones of the grassland cavalry and the Yin army, and there were many cracks on it. Then he saw the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. He led his subordinates and continued to charge forward, continuing to kill. He did not remember how many enemies he had killed. He only remembered that the proud papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace were left with fear and despair. He only remembered that all the enemies who dared to stand in front of the Vanguard Battalion had become corpses. The killing lasted until daybreak. He had also killed his way from the archway to the palace. This memory was very bloody, but it made him feel very happy. Blood kept flowing from the wound on his head and spread to his eyes. Sheng Yongli's vision had become blood red. The Yin Imperial Palace was full of autumn trees. It was no longer beautiful, only bloody. He was very tired, but thinking that the general's order had not been completed, he dragged his injured right leg and used the padao to support his heavy body and continued to walk into the palace. Sheng Yongli did not look back. He knew that his subordinates who had followed him into the palace had all died. Because he did not hear any footsteps behind him, Sheng Yongli didn't care. He continued forward. Suddenly, a few flashes of light appeared in Bloody's vision. It should be other soldiers of the Tang Empire who had broken into the Imperial Palace and wanted to take advantage of the chaos to set the palace on fire. Unfortunately, after a series of battles, there were too few comrades who could break into the Imperial Palace. The fire was quickly put out by the palace guards and eunuchs. Sheng Yongli shook his head regretfully. Then, he saw a scarlet palace gate. He had no idea where he was. He tucked half of the padao under his armpit and pushed the heavy palace door open. Behind the door was a side hall. There were many panic-stricken palace maids and eunuchs in front and behind the side hall. Seeing the Tang soldiers covered in blood, the palace maids and eunuchs screamed. The screams of the eunuchs were even more shrill and miserable than those of the palace maids. Sheng Yongli was taken aback and put the padao back into his hand. Seeing an old man in bright yellow clothes behind the eunuch and palace maid, he subconsciously felt that he was seeing things and rubbed his eyes. When his fingers left his eyes, they were covered in blood. Some brave eunuch screamed and picked up a wooden stick to hit him. Sheng Yongli wanted to swing his padao, but he found that all his strength seemed to have been used up the moment he pushed open the palace gate. He could not lift his arm. With a dull thud, the wooden stick in a eunuch's hand hit him hard on the forehead. There were already 2 deep wounds on his forehead, and a lot of blood flowed from them. Therefore, even with the addition of the rod, it didn't seem to change much. However, the strength of the rod caused his vision to turn dark, and he almost fell. Sheng Yongli was about to fall, but he stared at the old man in bright yellow clothes on the stone steps and refused to fall. He stared at the old man. The only old man who could wear bright yellow clothes in the Yin Kingdom's imperial palace could be the Yin Emperor. After a whole night of fighting, he finally broke into the imperial palace and found the Yin Emperor. He was about to complete the order given by the general, but he had no strength and was about to die. Sheng Yongli was very unwilling. He was very unwilling. The Yin Emperor had been seriously ill for many years and could die at any time. He was kept alive by the imperial doctors and precious medicine sent by Chang and City. Now that the emperor was dead, why was this old man still alive? Sheng Yongli roared angrily. Then he used all his strength to throw the half of the padao in his hand at the old man in the distance. With the injuries on his body, he should have died long ago. The reason why he did not die was because he had been holding his breath. There was not much strength left in his body. The padao broke through the air and flew crookedly. It did not touch the Yin Emperor's body and fell down. It bounced a few times on the ground and almost hit the Yin Emperor's toes. The Yin Emperor had been seriously ill for many years and was besieged by the Tang army. He was so shocked that he could not think clearly. Seeing the Tang army throw a flying knife at him like a blood demon, he did not even see where the knife landed. He only heard a crisp sound and was so scared that his face turned pale and his lips turned black. He clutched his chest and collapsed into the eunuch's arms. "You scared the hell out of me." The Yin Emperor screamed and stomped on the ground. Then he closed his eyes and stopped breathing. Screams and cries rang out in the side hall. The eunuchs and palace maids fled in all directions. No one cared about the Yin Emperor's body. In a panic, a palace maid overturned an oil lamp and the gauze curtain suddenly ignited. Sheng Yongli looked at the scene in front of him, and it took him a while to understand what had happened. He muttered to himself, "He was scared to death? You call this the emperor?" After saying this, and completing the military order given by Xian Zhilong, he finally felt tired and pain. He slowly sat on the ground and closed his eyes with a satisfied smile. Sheng Yongli, the commander of the Tang Northeast Border Military Camp, had won the last victory of his military career. The news of the Yin Emperor's death quickly spread from the palace to the prince's mansion. Looking at the billowing black smoke in the direction of the palace, Xian Zhilong was quiet for a long time. Then he laughed out loud. His laughter seemed especially presumptuous and happy. "Even if it was an ambush, even if Her Highness and I fell into your trap, you still have to exchange the Emperor's life and the palace for destroying the Northeast Border Military." Crown Prince Chongming's face was livid. Long Qing was silent. Xian Zhilong looked at the two quietly. His eyes were unusually cold. He said, "This is not enough. I can tell you now that in the future, capital Cheng will be massacred by the Tang army." Long Qing said, "There will be no Tang Empire in the world, and naturally there will be no Tang army. Her Highness and I are indeed the sinners of the Tang Empire. But do you really think that the Battle of Capital Cheng can decide everything? Destroy the Tang Empire? Just you?" Xian Zhilong looked at the crowd and said sarcastically. Then he pulled back his sword and committed suicide. For the final victory, there are still 2 days before the double monthly votes. Well, let's update more tomorrow and the day after. Don't wait until the double to fight. Fight every day. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 711. I discovered a particularly scary problem. After I changed the input method, it automatically recognized something. Then I didn't pay attention to it. As a result, during this period of time, all the versions of myself have been typed into myself. I replaced them in the manuscript and found more than 500 places. I really can't change them in the VIP chapter. I'm ashamed. Please ignore them. The next chapter will be right away. Crown Prince Chongming's face was very pale. His hands were slightly trembling in his sleeves. He looked at the half-ruined and half-scorched palace and wanted to say something, but he could not say anything. This ambush was carried out completely according to his and Long Qing's plans and arrangements. Before the ambush, they had expected that the desperate Tang army would inevitably launch a desperate counterattack. However, no matter how they thought about it, no one could have imagined that the Tang army's counterattack would be so terrifying and the Yin kingdom would pay such a heavy price. Father passed away, the palace was burned, and the elite combat power that had been accumulated for years was almost used up in this war. In the end, they only got the northeast border military of the Tang Empire, which was 1/6 of the enemy's strength. Was it really worth it? I didn't lie to Xian Zhilong. Half of the cavalry of the left king's palace are now in the eastern states and counties, preparing to kill the remaining Tang army. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace are indeed more than 10,000. Long Qing said after a moment of silence, I admit that I still underestimated the combat power of the Tang army. If the commander of this heavy cavalry was not Xian Zhilong, but the original Xiahou, perhaps we would have been prisoners now. But I still believe that the Tang Empire will perish. What we have done is worth it. Crown Prince Chongming looked at him and said, Why are you so confident? Long Qing said, Because this is not just a matter of the Yin kingdom, but a matter of the world. How Yin wants the Tang Empire to perish. Who can stop it? Xian Zhilong left most of the troops except for the heavy cavalry on the way back to the east. Correspondingly, Prince Longqing had also put a lot of effort into this area. In addition to his grassland cavalry, the allied forces of the Song and Qi kingdoms, the prefectural armies of the Yin kingdom, and more importantly, more than 1,000 papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace joined the war. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace and the grassland cavalrymen joined forces and successfully split up the northeast border military of the Tang Empire. The Tang army did not have the protection of the heavy cavalry, so they decided to break up and cross the blockade line to return to the Tang Empire. If this was an ordinary battlefield, the response of the current generals of the Tang army would not be too much of a problem. The problem was that this was not an ordinary battlefield, but the land of the Yin kingdom. The feud between Tang and Yin was extremely deep. The land in the northeast of the Tang Empire was forcibly taken from the Yin Empire many years ago. Between the two countries, wars would break out every once in a while. In recent years, General Xiahou had been in charge of Tiang City, and his actions had become increasingly ruthless and cruel. The northeast border military's massacre in the Yin territory was too bloody. In the eyes of the Yin people, the Tangs were all evil invaders. In the eyes of the people of the East Yin, every Tangs were demons that should be sent to the underworld. Thus, the chase turned into a tragic civil war. All the people of the East Yin were mobilized. Even though they knew that the most likely outcome of encountering the Tang army was death, there were still many young men who went into the mountains and fields with sticks and farming tools to look for traces of the Tang army. They reported it to the government as soon as possible and then passed it on to the cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace and the Grassland Cavalry. Tens of thousands of the Tang army, after being separated and surrounded, scattered themselves and then were surrounded again. Gradually, they formed countless small teams and struggled through the mountains and forests of the East Yin toward the Tang territory. Some of the Tang soldiers fell into the traps set by the hunters of the Yin kingdom and were coldly abandoned. Some Tang soldiers were found looking for food by the strong men of the village and were beaten to death by hundreds of people with sticks. On a peak somewhere in Kunshan County, several Tang soldiers looked at the people of the Yin kingdom who were gradually searching toward the peak. Their expressions gradually changed from anger and confusion to calmness, and then they began to tidy up their equipment. A Yin man shouted angrily at them from dozens of feet away. When you killed the women and children of the Yin kingdom, did you ever think that the Tang people would also be like stray dogs today? An arrow flew over and accurately hit the throat of the Yin man. A Tang soldier put away his bow expressionlessly and said coldly, When two countries are at war, it is either you kill me or I kill you. I have killed 17 Yin soldiers in my life. How can you get back at me? The people of the Yin kingdom who surrounded the mountain were in an uproar and then became even more angry and hateful. A white-haired old man shouted sternly, Don't be afraid, everyone. They have limited arrows. The Song family village killed 3 Tang cavalrymen last night. How can we, the hundreds of men of the Chun family village, not be able to deal with these Tang thieves without horses. The Tang soldier who shot the arrow was a low-ranking officer of this small team. The rest of the team had died on the road to the west, and now only the four of them were left. He looked at the excited Yin people who were approaching with farm tools in their hands. He frowned slightly and began to shoot arrows with his subordinates. After shooting the arrows, he pulled out his knife. When he was exhausted, he looked at the Yin people and said, "Idiots." Then he led his subordinates and rushed off the cliff to their deaths. In the Battle of Capital Chung, the most elite black armored cavalry of the Tang Northeast Border Military was destroyed. This was the first time in many people's memory that the Tang Empire had suffered such a heavy loss. It was also the first time that the invincible black armored cavalry of the Tang Empire was destroyed on a large scale. The whole world was shocked. The death of the Yin Emperor and the burning of the Yin Palace, which should have been more shocking, were completely forgotten. In the eyes of the people, it was worth it to destroy the black armored cavalry of the Tang Empire. The news spread to the West Hill Divine Palace as fast as possible. The solemn black Divine Hall of Judgment reverberated with a very strange and depressing atmosphere. The red-robed priests and the black-robed deacons of the judicial department knelt on the ground and did not dare to breathe. The destruction of the Tang army was, of course, excellent news for the West Hill Divine Palace. Prince Longqing, who had returned to Taoism, had made such a great contribution to the West Hill Divine Palace, which made many people in the judicial department excited. However, the current owner of the Divine Hall of Judgment was Yi Hongyu. People in the Divine Hall of Judgment did not know what the great Divine Priest of Judgment would think about this matter, especially about the great contribution made by Prince Longqing. Yi Hongyu sat on the seat of heavenly black jade, like a pearl inlaid in an inkstone. The blood-red divine robe of judgment on her body was like a red cloth wrapped around the pearl. She really did not expect that Longqing would do such a big thing. She also did not expect that she did not receive any news from the beginning to the end of the battle in Capital Chung. This meant that there were still loopholes in her control of the judicial department, and the hierarch lord still did not trust her. At this moment, she recalled that 2 years ago, she accepted Ning Kei's request and went thousands of miles north to kill Longqing. At that time, Crown Prince Chongming was the commander of the Yin Kingdom's military, but he did not respond in time, which made her very unhappy. Now that she thought about it, it was natural that the two brothers had put on such a good show in front of the world. Looking at the red-robed priests and black-robed deacons kneeling in the hall, Yi Hongyu slightly raised the corner of her mouth. She knew what these people were thinking, and also knew that they were afraid of her anger. But why would they be angry? Yi Hongyu stood up from the seat of heavenly black jade, looked at the crowd, and said, "Get ready, everyone. It seems that it will not be long before the cavalry of the Divine Hall will appear in the Tang Kingdom. To be continued. If you like this work, please come come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 712. The battle in Capital Chung shocked the world. Of course, the Tang Empire was the most shocked. The atmosphere in the court was particularly tense. The Queen's faction, which had been silent for a few days, straightened their bodies and stared at the bead curtain behind the throne. Her Highness, Princess Liu, was behind the bead curtain. The ministers did not hide the anger in their eyes. The northeast border military of the Tang Empire had been wiped out. Nothing like this had happened for many years. How could the proud Tangs bear it? Now the streets and alleys of Chong were full of discussions about this and accusations against the new emperor and the princess regent. Xian Zhilong was pushed to the position of the great general of the north by Her Highness. His decision to join forces with the Yin army was also Her Highness's plan. Now that they had suffered such a crushing defeat, who would be responsible if not Her Highness? The Tang Emperor, Li Huiyuan, looked at the ministers' faces and eyes. He was so angry that he almost broke the armrest of the throne. He wanted to send the Yulin royal guards to kick them out. But thinking of his sister's words, he suppressed his anger and looked at Mo Han, the Grand Secretary of the Hall of Wenhua. The Yin Imperial Palace was burned and the Yin Emperor was killed. I don't want to argue for General Xian Zhilong and the soldiers of the Northeast Border Military. I just want to say that they did not embarrass the Tang Empire. Mo Han said with a gloomy face, "If any minister wants to criticize the soldiers who died for the country, please forgive me for cursing his relatives on the spot." This sentence was vulgar, but it was actually very shrewd. Even if the ministers of the Queen secretly scolded Xian Zhilong and the generals of the Northeast Border Military, no one dared to say anything in the court. Heroes could not be insulted. Those soldiers had died for the country, but there were still people alive who needed to be responsible. The minister of the Ministry of Rights stepped out and bowed to the bead curtain. He said calmly and directly, "I think that the responsibility for the battle in capital Chung lies with your highness. What do you think?" The court was silent. Everyone knew that the Queen's faction would not let go of this opportunity. But not many people, including the officials of the Queen's faction, could think that the minister of the Ministry of Rights would directly say this and not give the emperor and the princess any chance. After a while, Liu's voice came from behind the bead curtain. "All responsibility lies with me. Once the war is over, I will pay with my life. But before that, my lord should clearly consider what the most pressing matter for my great Tang is." The atmosphere in Chang and was very depressing because of the defeat at the front line, especially because it was a crushing defeat that many Tangs had never seen in their lives. Although there was no gloom when the Tangs discussed this matter, they were mostly angry. Anyway, not many people were in the mood to drink and have fun. But the building of Pines and Cranes was still brightly lit today, because a rich guest had booked the entire restaurant several days ago. After the court session was over, the guests gradually arrived and the liveliness began to return. Chengjing has suffered a crushing defeat, and the soldiers of the Northeast Border Military are fighting for their lives in foreign countries. But you and I are meeting at a restaurant. Although a righteous heart is not afraid of right and wrong, and good wine can nourish the soul of heroes, beautiful women are out of the question. Master Xingjing still refuses to come? At this critical juncture, how can he be at ease in the residence, planting flowers and weeding weeds? Everyone has their own ambitions. Don't force him. Tonight, in the building of Pines and Cranes, was a gathering of the officials of the Emperor's faction. They probably thought that there was nothing to hide, so they did not try to hide it. The minister of the Ministry of Rights looked at the people at the banquet and frowned slightly. He said, "The main issue of today's gathering is the eastern border. Do you have any opinions on what Her Highness said in the court session?" An official sneered and said, "Pay with my life? How is this different from the vows of shrew in the marketplace? Her Highness has stayed with the barbarians in the wilderness for a long time. How did she learn this trick?" The minister of the Ministry of Rights rebuked, "What nonsense are you talking about? Shut up." The official apologized, but he still did not let it go. He said, "I would like to ask you, in the history of the Tang Empire, is there a precedent of an emperor or a governor paying with his life because of a defeat at the front line? Since there is no such precedent, what does Her Highness mean? In order to shut the mouths of the people? After the war is over, are we really going to interrogate her and ask her to die? This is preposterous to the extreme." The Taichung Temple Chancellor stroked his beard and said after a moment of thought, "But Her Highness's actions can at least dispel the grievances of the soldiers. Now that the country is in a crisis, His Majesty and Her Highness's next measures are appropriate. It is safe to move the troops of the Gushan Commandery and the Northern Military Camp to the east." The previous official sneered and said, "It is just a way to cure the headache and cure the foot. Who doesn't know how to be a tinker? If you ask me, the eastern border is empty, and we can also use the Southern Expedition Army. Her Highness has decided to use the 3 states of the Gushan Commandery. Everyone knows that she wants Hua Shanyue to defeat the Yin army and win back some face for her." The minister of the Ministry of Rights heard this and frowned even more. He said, "The Southern Expedition Army is far away at the edge of the forest, separated from Qinghe Commandery by mountains. They can only go around the Shannon Road, which is a long journey. By the time the Southern Expedition Army goes to the eastern border and fills the gap left by the Northeast Border Military, the Yin army will have already fought their way to Chang'an." The official was startled and did not say anything more. Lord Li said something earlier, and I think that's the main point. Now that the country is in a crisis, all disputes should be settled in the court. The Tang Emperor and his ministers should work together to fight against the foreign enemies. The minister of the Ministry of Rights looked at the people at the banquet and said earnestly. Someone said worriedly, "But when will the Empress and the sixth prince return to Chang'an?" The gathering at the building of pines and cranes ended quickly. The officials on the Empress's side finally decided to keep quiet for the time being and wait for this difficult period of time to pass before discussing other matters. However, from the attitude of the officials, including the arrangement of the imperial court for the defense of the eastern border and the anger of the people in Chang, and it could be seen that the current Tang Empire, from the emperor to the ministers to the ordinary people, still believed that the Tang Empire would not lose, even though they were sad and angry about the result of the battle in capital Chang. Zhuge Warren had already resigned from his position as the director of the Imperial Center Administration. He also attended the gathering at the building of pines and cranes. However, this person was usually a bit sinister and ruthless, so no one was willing to deal with him. Now that he had already resigned from his position, inviting him to the gathering was already out of respect for the Empress. Who would say anything more to him? Zhuge Warren was very clear about what the officials thought of him. He did not show any resentment, but was more silent than usual. In his opinion, these officials only knew how to talk and did not know what was important at the moment. Why did the Tang Empire's army suffer a crushing defeat? Why was the country in a crisis? It was precisely because the siblings in the palace were in an improper position and were extremely stupid. As long as they could welcome the Empress and the sixth prince back, the Tang Empire would be at peace and all the problems would be solved. After leaving the building of pines and cranes, Zhuge Warren did not return to his mansion. Instead, he walked in the direction of the imperial city. He knew that there were always cultivators following him in the Southern Gate Temple after he resigned, so he did not deliberately hide his whereabouts. Anyway, the place he was going to was not a place that anyone could enter. He went to the Imperial Palace's Imperial Guard Office. Su Chongshan was now the chief of the Imperial Guard Office of the Tang Empire. This calm elder, who had dealt with Ning Ke many times, was still as simple and amiable as before, until he saw Zhuge Warren's face that was like a poisonous snake. "Zhuge, isn't it a little inappropriate for you to appear here again?" Su Chongshan looked at Zhuge Warren and said with a slightly solemn and vigilant expression. Zhuge Warren said, "I think no matter how inappropriate it is, it can't be more inappropriate than you appearing here." Su Chongshan frowned and said, "I don't know what nonsense you are talking about." Zhuge Warren smiled and said, "I mean, there is nothing stranger than a master from the Devil's Doctrine becoming the chief of the Imperial Guard Office of the Tang Empire." Su Chongshan's eyes slowly narrowed, and a cold light flashed through them. Zhuge Warren did not seem to see his reaction. He walked straight to the chair and sat down. He lifted the front of his robe to shake off the non-existent dust and said calmly, "Sometimes when I think about it, I really admire you people. You are obviously cultivating the skills of the Devil's Doctrine, but how can you hide from so many people and become a martial arts master?" General Xiahou seemed to have obtained some kind of skill from the West Hill Divine Palace. "Did you learn it too?" At this moment, Su Chongshan became calm. He poured a cup of tea and slowly drank it, but he did not pay attention to him. Zhuge Warren looked at him and continued to praise. "The Devil's Doctrine is really powerful. They were wiped out by Mr. Ku and chased around the world by the West Hill Divine Palace, but they still managed to retain so many people. The person who made this plan back then should be the legendary divine Lord Lotus, right? TSK. If this bigwig could live until now, and if General Xiahou was not killed by Ning Ke, wouldn't the Tang Empire's palace be completely under your control?" Su Chongshan smiled and said, "You know that no matter what you say now, no one in Chang'an will believe you. So you can tell me why you are here." Zhuge Warren slowly stopped smiling and stood up. He stared into his eyes and said, "I don't know what the Empress has to do with the Devil's Doctrine, but I am very sure that both Xiahou and you are on the Empress's side. I am also on the Empress's side, so we should work together to do something." Su Chongshan fell silent and said after a moment, "What do you want to do?" Zhuge Warren said, "Since you are on the Empress's side, Then you should know very well what you want to do. Su Chongshan said slowly. You want me to die? Zhuge Warren said. Now that the desolate man is about to be exterminated and the Tang Empire is also destroyed, there is no place in the world that can accommodate the remnants of the devil's doctrine. Since you're going to die, why not die meaningfully? Ma Shixiang stood on the mud wall and looked at the sky. The sky in the wilderness was very gloomy, and it had been like this for many days. It looked like it was going to rain, but it never did. The news of the northeast border military's annihilation in the Yin territory had already reached the city of Wei. The coffin of the former emperor was still in Helan City, and no one knew when the empress and the little prince would return to Chang'an. The entire sky of the Tang Empire was covered with dark clouds. Just like the city of Wei, no one knew when the storm would come. Ma Shixiang looked very solemn, but not because of the difficult situation the Tang Empire was facing. He was just an ordinary low-level general at the frontier fortress, and he had no right and no way to worry about the entire empire. He was ordered to guard the city of Wei, so he had to worry about the city of Wei. There are also some that I revise after eating and then update. Saving manuscripts doesn't seem difficult, but when I update 2 or 3 chapters every day, I'll find that the food I've saved up for a few autumns is gone. That feeling is really empty, so anxious. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 713. The city of Wei seemed to be as peaceful as before, but something worried Ma Shixiang. Recently, there were only a few caravans passing through the city of Wei. Although the continuous rainstorm made the grasslands soft and muddy, it still felt strange. What alarmed him the most was that, according to the reports of the riders, the horse gang that had been entrenched in Shubi Lake for years had suddenly disappeared without a trace. No one knew where those damnable guys had gone. When Ningke was still in the city of Wei, the 7 stockade villages cleaned up Shubi Lake most frequently and got the most income from collecting firewood. However, even in those years, the horse gang was still reluctant to give up Shubi Lake. The last time the horse gang left Shubi Lake was because of the black horse carriage. It was because Ningke and the girl took a look at the city of Wei from afar. Then why did they disappear this time? Was it because of the rainstorm? However, although the forest by Shubi Lake showed signs of loosening, there were no signs of landslides. The bold horse gang would never abandon their nest because of fear. Ma Shixiang walked down the low mud wall, greeted the soldiers and vendors in the city, and walked back to the shabby military tent. He was silent for a long time as he read the military intelligence report sent by the Northern Military Camp yesterday. Time gradually passed. The tent flap was lifted, and a lieutenant covered in dust hurriedly walked in. Ma Shixiang's eyes suddenly lit up. He suddenly stood up and said, "What did they say?" The captain shook his head and said, "Kaiping said that the military intelligence had already been sent to the Northern Military Camp." The other 6 stockade villages also found something strange, but there was no reply from the Northern Military Camp. Some of the Northern Battlefront Army followed His Majesty to the Eastern Wilderness. Now they are still in Helan City, and there is no news from them. Now the Imperial Court is going to send troops to Tiang City for defense. Ma Shixiang looked at the summary of the military intelligence and frowned deeply. He continued, "The great general's mansion is now focusing on the eastward march. I'm afraid they have neglected the military intelligence reported by their subordinates." The captain asked, "Then what should we do?" "That's not what I'm most worried about," Ma Shixiang said worriedly. "What I'm most afraid of is that if the main force of the Northern Battlefront Army is transferred to the east, the Golden Tribe Royal Court will launch an all-out attack from the south. Even if the general's mansion can react, they won't be able to stop it." The lieutenant's expression immediately became extremely nervous, his voice trembling as he said, "All these years, the Royal Court's cavalry has only dared to invade and harass us. How could they be so bold as to send their entire army south?" Ma Shixiang said calmly, "The Dean and His Majesty have passed away one after another, and the court is in turmoil. Now the northeast border military has suffered heavy losses. The palace cavalry is like a pack of hungry wolves. When we are strong, they do not dare to move, but when we are weak, they will bare their fangs. The captain asked, "General, what should we do?" "Salad. I'll ask Chef to make a plate of bitter lettuce salad tonight. I'm a little angry these days." Ma Shixiang stood up and walked out of the tent, saying, "Also, tell everyone to raise the alert level to the highest. I remember there are still a dozen guns in the warehouse. Take them out and clean them. Be careful of open fire." In the gloomy moment before the storm, the highest military commander of the city of Wei at the border of the Tang Empire was giving out orders as if he was assigning chores, ordinary and meticulous. He would retire next year and return to his hometown to embrace his grandchildren. He did not want to see another war more than anyone else, but he knew better than anyone that no one could escape when the war came. Fortunately, he had seen many wars and seen many deaths. Although he vaguely knew that this war would be very different from the past, he was still very calm and slept soundly. In the early morning, Ma Shixiang was awakened by the emergency warning. He still had time to wash his face, put on his armor, wiped his sword, and tightened his bow. Under the protection of the soldiers, he came to the wall of the city of Wei in high spirits. The morning sun had already left the ground, and the wilderness was bathed in a warm red light. The clouds that had covered the city of Wei for many days had finally dispersed. However, the people in the city of Wei did not feel a trace of warmth when they saw the scene in front of them. Countless cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe royal court bathed in the morning light. They covered the wilderness outside the city like a pack of black wolves. It was impossible to count their number with the naked eye. Ma Shixiang squinted and looked at the king's flag in the depths of the Golden Tribe royal court's cavalry. He suddenly smiled proudly and said, "We happen to be on the route of Chan Yu's army. Old Wei and the others will envy me to death." The Tang soldiers on the wall of the city of Wei knew that Old Wei was the military commander of the Kaiping market. He had been suppressing the general all his life, and the general often gossiped about him. If it was any other day, they would inevitably make fun of him. But today, no one could laugh out loud. Their faces were very pale, and their hands holding the hilts of their sabers were a little cold. Ma Shixiang stopped smiling and asked seriously, "Have you prepared the horses I asked you to prepare the day before yesterday?" An aide replied from the side, reporting to General, "Everything is ready." Ma Shixiang asked, "Are they the best horses?" "Yes." "Are they the best riders?" "Yes." "One to report to the Kaiping market." "I think Old Wei is about the same." "One should be enough," Ma Shixiang said seriously, "for to report to the northern military camp, and the other 4 to report to Chang. Remember to change horses without stopping. Now the whole Tang Empire needs your speed." The 9 Tang soldiers who had been selected in advance answered loudly. Ma Shixiang looked at the scene outside the city of Wei and said indifferently, "Tell the people in Chang, and to forget about Prince Longqing and those bastards in the east. The real enemy of the Tang Empire is coming." The 9 Tang soldiers left from the rear of the city of Wei with dozens of the best horses in the city of Wei to carry out their mission. Ma Shixiang looked back at the owner of the restaurant, the laundry Annie, and the small number of residents under the wall. After a moment of silence, he said, "I'm sorry. I have a responsibility to protect the people, but I'm afraid I can't protect you today. You can either leave or hide in the cellar. Believe me, the Tang army will come back one day." The adjutant asked, "General, the enemy is strong. What should we do next?" All the soldiers in the city of Wei looked at Ma Shixiang. Ma Shixiang's gray hair was flying in the morning wind. "We have to protect the gate of the Tang Empire." "Yes." The cavalry of the Golden Palace outside the city of Wei began to move. The entire wilderness began to shake. The mud walls of the city of Wei kept shaking, and the accumulated dust fell down. The dense grassland cavalrymen swarmed over like a tide, drowning the city of Wei in an instant. In the autumn of the 18th year of Tianqi era, the northeast border military of the Tang Empire was destroyed. Chang wanted to transfer a part of the northern army to Tuyang City to resist the invasion of the Yan army. At this moment, the Golden Palace, which had been quiet for decades, mobilized all its forces and invaded the Tang Empire. The Tang army in the 7 stockade villages fought back bravely, But the enemy was strong, and they were defeated one after another. The grassland cavalry continued to move south, and the vanguard was directed at Chang'an. A friend asked, "You said you want to work hard, but there are so few chapters every day. What's the point?" I said the day before yesterday that I'm saving chapters for the double monthly votes the day after tomorrow. No matter how much I can save, I'm working hard. Then I said that Ning Ke hasn't appeared for a long time. It can't be helped because this story has nothing to do with him, and he can't appear all over the world. He is not the eldest brother, and he can't do the limitless state. Of course, he can't disappear forever. This is his story. I've set the stage for him, and he will come out the day after tomorrow. There will be 2 chapters tomorrow during the day, and the first chapter of the double monthly votes the day after tomorrow. Then, there will be many chapters during the day after tomorrow. I hope everyone will be satisfied, and I hope everyone can hold the monthly votes. Then, let's see if you want to vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 714. The news of the Golden Tribe Royal Court's invasion spread across the world like wildfire and shocked the entire Central Plains. Chang'an reacted very quickly. Liu suppressed the uproar of the ministers of the Queen's faction with great courage. She did not care that she might become a laughingstock later and issued several military orders. She ordered the Northern Battlefront Army, which was moving towards Tuyang City, to retreat immediately. Together with the Northern Military Camp, they formed 2 lines of defense outside Abay County. At the same time, she ordered the Southern Battlefront Army to stop fighting with the savage tribes in the primeval forest and to rush to the northern border of the Empire as soon as possible. At the same time, she ordered the Western Battlefront Army to move north along the Pamir Mountains to harass the Golden Tribe cavalry that was invading the Tang Empire. What shocked the ministers the most was that Liu did not care that Chang'an might be out of control. She even sent the Yulin Royal Guards that she had the most control to the northern border. At the emergency court meeting, all the ministers admitted that Her Highness's arrangement was selfless and timely. But there were still people who strongly opposed it. In the ministers' view, the Northern Battlefront Army could not support Tuyang City, which meant that the Yin Army and the cavalry of the Left King's Palace could march straight in. Her Highness had also sent the Yulin Royal Guards to the northern border. What would Chang'an do then? The Northern Battlefront Army's morale would definitely be damaged after so many setbacks. It was better to go to Tuyang City, according to the previous decision, and leave the task of defending against the Golden Tribe Royal Court to the other armies. Liu used only 2 sentences to settle the dispute. Chang'an will never be conquered. Even I am not afraid of death. Why should you be? After the new emperor ascended to the throne, Liu had always been kind and gentle. The reason why she would change her attitude and show her absolute toughness at this moment was because she knew better than anyone else how terrifying the Golden Tribe Royal Court was. She used to marry the talented Chan Yu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court and lived in the wilderness for a long time. She knew that the grassland cavalry that had been quiet for many years was the real threat to the Tang Empire. Until now, her guard were still the barbarians that she brought back from the wilderness. She knew very well that the Golden Tribe Royal Court was a monster that had been suppressed by the Tang Empire for hundreds of years. If the Tang Empire could no longer suppress it, it would unleash unimaginable destructive power. Compared to the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, the cavalry of the Left King's Palace was like a child, while the Yin army was like a crying girl. Under the terrible pressure of the Golden Palace's southward invasion, Liu had no interest in paying attention to the army led by Prince Longqing. She was very clear that the vast territory of the Tang Empire and the local armies of the various prefectures would exhaust them. Other than some losses to the people, it would not affect the overall situation. Therefore, even though the officials of the Empress faction opposed it, even though even her most loyal subjects carefully expressed their doubts in private, she still insisted on mobilizing the entire empire's forces to the north. The facts of the future would prove that her current decision was correct. However, at that time, not many people could understand her decision. After the court meeting ended, she also felt extremely tired. A faint fear slowly rose from the deepest part of her heart. Was this her retribution for tampering with her father's edict? At this moment, there was a noise outside the hall. She frowned slightly, but before she could say anything, she saw several officials led by eunuchs hurrying in. Li Huiyuan, He Ming-chi, and the new director of Tianwu Agency also walked in from the side door. Everyone looked extremely serious. Li Yu was slightly shocked, but her expression did not change. She asked what happened. He Ming-chi glanced at His Majesty. Li Huiyuan walked forward and handed a letter in his hand to Li Yu. The official who came from outside the palace said in a trembling voice, "The West Hill Divine Palace has just issued an edict." The edict from the West Hill Divine Palace, together with a letter from the Hierarch Lord, was sent to Chang. In the edict, the West Hill Divine Palace exposed the identity of the Empress and pointed out that the Tang Emperor had protected the remnants of the Devil's Doctrine for decades, which was a blasphemy against the filthy country. 2 generations of the Academy were punished by heaven because they disrespected Hao Yin, so the Divine Hall called for the whole world to attack the Tang Empire. It also said that the Golden Palace went south under the order of Hao Yin. They advised the believers of the Tang Empire not to resist, but to overthrow the Dark Royal family. After reading the edict from the Divine Hall, Li Yu began to read the letter from the Hierarch Lord. Compared with the Divine Hall's ornate letter, the Hierarch Lord's handwritten letter to her was much simpler. There was only one sentence written on it. "The night covers the stars. The Tang Empire is restless. Your Highness, surrender." She was silent, and her fingers holding the letter kept trembling. The hall was quiet. Li Huiyuan looked at his sister nervously. He Ming-chi slightly lowered his head. The eunuchs and palace maids were pale, and the officials widened their eyes. If the Golden Palace going south was the strongest enemy that the Tang Empire had encountered in decades, then the edict from the West Hill Divine Palace and the letter from the Hierarch Lord were the things that the Tangs were most afraid of. Yes, there was no country in the world that could defeat the Tang Empire. Even the Golden Palace, as long as the Tang Empire could survive the initial period, they would eventually win. However, if the whole world began to attack the Tang Empire, could the Tang Empire withstand it? Many years ago, the Tang Empire had faced a similar situation. But at that time, the Tang Empire had the headmaster, and now the headmaster had ascended to heaven. Any other country would have collapsed in the face of such terrible pressure and desperate prospects to attack a country with the whole world's power. The Tang Empire did not collapse. The confidence and strong spirit that had been tempered for 1,000 years made the people living here vigilant and uneasy, but they still did not have the idea of giving up. All the institutions of the imperial court took action as fast as possible. Chang was in a state of solemnity. All kinds of military orders were sent from Chang and to every region of the vast territory. In contrast, the imperial palace, the political and military power center of the Tang Empire, became quiet. Everything that should be done was being done. What else could they do but wait? Li Yu stood by the stone railing and looked at the moon in the night sky. She was silent. She thought of the words in the letter written by the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace and the instructions made by the imperial astronomer many years ago. She slowly clenched her hands behind her back. Her nails cut her palms and stained them with blood. She took a deep breath and forcibly suppressed the fear and confusion in her heart. She turned around and walked around the side of the hall. She walked across the small lake and entered the imperial study. She had never entered the imperial study since she changed the edict and let Li Huiyuan ascend the throne. This was because this small room was filled with her father's scent, and she felt a little stifled. However, she still came today because she needed her father to give her spiritual comfort and support. A military general walked into the imperial study and saluted. The war had not affected Chang, but the whole empire was facing a war. It was no longer a time of peace, but a time of war. When will General Su Shi arrive in Chang'an? She looked at the general and asked. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.